Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 221. Way Forward. What? Northern couldn't believe what he was hearing. First generation? 10 years ago? What are you saying, that students are being sent here deliberately? And 10 years? Seriously? Raven gently nodded. I was as shocked when Helena told me. Back then they were quite lacking in the academy, and on the brink of being expelled because of their useless talents. But they were approached by Ruffsberg. He told them that he was going to make them stronger. All they needed to do was trust him. Then he gathered 10 of them and sent them here. Northern's face paled. It was merely a suspicion, but hearing it like this was scary, very painful. Did that man really deceive all of them? And Gilbert, Annette, and the twins knew all about it too? So, you are saying they were actually sent here deliberately? Raven responded fiercely. Yes, and abandoned just like every 10 students that were sent yearly, and finally us. 100. Northern's hand slowly rose and covered his mouth. Crap! He was lost in his thoughts for a while. Then a frown formed across his forehead, and he looked at Raven. What's the point of you saying this to me? I'm not even done. Afghan, that guy, he knew about it. What? And he accepted? Yes. Northern shook his head. That makes no sense. Why would he agree to being sent and abandoned in a desolate country? Or he didn't know he was going to be abandoned. No, it wasn't that he didn't know. He knew everything that was going to happen. Ruffsberg told him and he accepted. This was what caused the major drift between him and Helena. Northern frowned darkly. This is crazy. Crazier than I thought. You know what's more crazy? Northern looked at her face. In every generation, there is always someone that knows completely about Ruffsberg's plan and still follows up with it. Northern looked at her dubiously. How do you know that? How else? Weren't you following? Helena. So, you're just going to trust everything this lady says to you and plunge into your own death because of it? Raven was silent for a bit. It looked like she was having a tough time answering Northern's question. After a few moments of deep thinking, she finally raised her eyes to Northern. Why would she lie to me? Northern raised one of his brows. There could be several reasons. Maybe she's just jealous that you became Afghan's wife and she didn't, and she just wanted to spoil him in your face, make you hate him and dare that you'd love to kill him, and that means be walking into your own death. Northern thought again, rolling his eyes. Or it could be because she hated Afghan because he forgot her after he became very successful with the whole leader thing and just wanted to spite him. And thus, making use of you, the naive tool for vengeance. Northern shook his head sadly at her. You're a naive fellow, very naive, Raven. Raven's face became dark. Very dark. It was usually hard to see emotions on her face, but this time, it was clear that Northern's words were getting on her nerves. Those reasons seem absurd and unreasonable to cook up something so real and true for. TSK, you don't know anything. I'm speaking from experience. Your best friend will have an affair with your girlfriend and convince you that it is for your sake. That's how cruel this world is. So this is what this is about? This is the reason you don't trust anyone? Because your best friend took your girlfriend? How old are you anyway to have a girlfriend? Raven's glare turned to one of disgust before Northern could say anything to clear himself. I thought you at least would have a semblance of common sense despite your stupidity. But maybe I was wrong to believe in you. If we can't see eye to eye on things, then maybe it's best for you to return to Lothellowen, Northern. She concluded and majestically turned away, walking alone into the distance. Terence looked at him for a few seconds, then exhaled heavily. Wow, that's a lot of pressure released. She stepped closer and tapped the young man on his shoulder, having to stand on the tip of her toes. Don't take it too harshly. Instead, Be proud of yourself. I have never seen anyone that actually managed to get Raven angry. Northern, I think you are special. Let's go, she said and walked away. Northern watched her walk away too. He then raised his head and sighed. Ah, crap. What the hell? It wasn't like he didn't have his own suspicions too. It wasn't like he didn't already know that all Raven was saying could be the truth. No, he bet his money on the fact that they were true. However, how exactly were they supposed to handle this situation? Because of it, Raven is mad at Afcon. She is probably mad at Gilbert too, but had been putting up with him. Will she one day also say she wants to kill Gilbert? You don't just go around killing people, you know? Northern sighed again and looked back. At this juncture, he had only two choices. Go back to Lothellowen and continue to live his lame and complacent life of scrambling for barely enough to survive and not truly striving to grow and maximize his overpowered potential. Or to continue further despite how uncomfortable and perilous it seems. With a suicidal hero like Raven Light Kageyama, his life was bound to be in constant danger. What was he going to do with that? What if she really puts them all in trouble and gets them killed? Northern was tempted to want to believe that Raven knew what she was doing and had it under control. But this past few events yanked him out of that delusion. She just went ahead and blindly trusted him. That was crazy. It was too crazy. Northern shrugged. It's not like I have a choice anyway. He had to grow and become stronger. He lacked passion. He wasn't sure what that meant, what Raven meant. Should he be passionate when the situation would put his life in danger? Living to fight another day too was an honorable thing. It's not like I even care about all of that. I just want to get strong, go home and kill Ruffsburg. Chapter 222. Helena versus Raven. Northern sighed and looked forward. The path before him was winding, so it had cornered. What was ahead was being blocked by the bushes around. Northern looked back once more, closed his eyes, opened them, and then began to go forward. He knew very well that this decision he was making right now was bound to make many situations, which would be totally out of control, come his way. He could even die because of a certain person's smartness, naivety, and confidence. She's a walking disaster, I swear. But he was still going forward, and he too knew why he was choosing this path despite knowing how dangerous it could be. But maybe she's right. Maybe I have no passion, Northern thought. What Raven had said was now living in his head rent-free, and it made him wonder. Does doing this make those words a lie? Or will doing this make him correct that very fact about himself? Northern really had no idea why anyone should be passionate about strength at the cost of their own life, when they need to survive. But maybe he too had forgotten that after survival, what was next? Maybe this journey was meant to remind him of one dream he had always told himself. Northern cut the corner. Raven and Terence were standing at the edge of the point where the brown grasses ended. Ahead of them was a low bamboo-built wall. The clearing was silent and serene beneath the moonlight, basking in darkness. Raven looked at Northern indifferently. It was amazing. The smile on her lips just now was totally gone. Do you have an ability or anything that can erase your presence in the darkness? Northern was silent for a second. He looked at her with an intense glare and replied, Yes. Okay, Terence will hide in the bush. I'll knock on her door and lure her out. I want you to find a way to get into her house and find the map. It's a black scroll. She has a table where she stacks her nonsense antiques since she loves exploring. All you need to do is get on that table. I'm sure it will be there. Northern laid a prolonged gaze on her and retorted. And if it isn't? It will be, she said to him with a stern tone. Northern smacked his lips angrily and walked away. As he did, black sparks began to fly around his body. His image changed completely from that of a poor foot soldier to a terrifying titan, one with horns. Even Raven's eyes seemed to admire his suit as he walked forward. To top it, a black rope also appeared on the lustrous black metal suit. Northern was looking like a dark knight birthed from the abyss. Before long, he disappeared, and Raven couldn't even see him nor feel his presence. She curved her lips up a little and looked at Terence. It's your turn. Terence looked at her, silent for a moment. What? You do know that some of the things Mr. Northern said are true, and you really should work on your relationship with people. She heaved a sigh. Well, I think he too needs to do that. She glanced one more time at her and walked away, entering into the cold and itchy bush. Raven made sure that Terence was completely hidden and looked around before she then walked forward. She stopped in front of the wooden gate, which was reaching her shoulders. She stood for a few seconds, then stepped back with just one leg. Breathing steadily, she clenched her fist and threw it forward. Like a thunderclap, her fist crashed and shattered the wooden gate, sending its splinters all around. Terence went bug-eyed, closing her open mouth. She's crazy. Why is she announcing her presence? Raven majestically walked into the clearing. In the middle of it was a cottage, one that seemed to have been haphazardly built, that could tear down with enough effort from the wind. Despite how unseemly this cottage seemed, it had lasted its owner for quite a while. The door of the cottage slowly creaked open, and someone walked out of it. She was slender, even more slender than Raven. She had brunette hair and they were braided. Blue paints like the marks of a hunter ran across her face, drowning her in a primal grace. Lean muscles rolled beneath her skin, like juvenile snakes. She had a young and beautiful face, but there was a wild and dangerous glint in her eyes, one that looked like suppressed madness. She looked just as crazy as Raven. Helena stopped in front of Raven and scowled at her before speaking. You have some guts, coming back here and destroying my gate. Her voice came off as strong, completely in vast contrast to how gentle she looked. Raven looked indifferently for a while, then she scoffed and looked down. She slowly raised her eyes to Helena with literal madness burning in them. What can I say? Someone taught me what it means to have guts. Helena looked away for a while. One of her brown eyes closed, then she opened it and replied to the black-haired lady in front of her. Yes, I have to admit, you had a great teacher. She scratched her head irritably. You see, little grunt, I guess she didn't teach you about respect and honor. A serpentine smile crept upon Raven's lips. No, she wasn't a person of such values. Helena raised her eyes and glared at Raven. Silence ensued for a dozen seconds. Then her voice rang in the cold darkness. You must be very crazy, Raven. Ah, of course you are indeed crazy. Helena spread out one hand to the side. White sparks flew into the air as a rod of light formed in her hand. Since you came here and even shattered my gate, you must have settled your scores with life and be ready for the reckoning of death. Raven threw both of her hands to the back and leaned her upper body forward, a devilish grin spreading her lips. How about you cut the poetic crap and come at me? The light faded, and Helena disappeared. Raven's eyes widened in that moment. Even though she was expecting it, she was still shocked. Helena's disappearance came with a terrifying clash that made both of Raven's swords shiver. It was all instantaneous, but it was more amazing that with such instantaneous movement, Raven, whose swords were just appearing, managed to block it. Helena threw the black rod back and swung it forward again. Helena's movements were blindingly fast, pushing Raven's defensive abilities to their limits. As the black rod came hurtling towards her again, Raven crossed her twin blades in an X shape, gritting her teeth as the impact sent shockwaves through her arms. Sparks flew from the clashing of steel against that mysterious dark rod. Not allowing Helena any respite, Raven disengaged and launched into a blistering offensive. Her swords were mere blurs as she rained down a flurry of slashes and thrusts, each strike carrying lethal force. But Helena was equally agile, her lithe form weaving between the attacks with almost supernatural grace. The air around them crackled with energy, distorted by their high-speed movements. With each clash of blade against rod, arcs of power danced across the weapon's surfaces. Raven could sense Helena's strength, of course. She was no ordinary opponent. She was a sage. It was already amazing that Raven could even hold on, even though it had barely been a minute since they began. Feinting with one sword, Raven caught Helena's rod with the other blade in a bind. Their faces were inches apart, eyes locked in an intense clash of wills. Not bad, Helena purred. But you're still far from getting there. With an overpowering strength, Helena shattered Raven's bind, causing the stalwart lady to stagger backward. With that momentary opening, Helena drove the edge of her rod forward, stabbing it into Raven's chest and throwing her away like a dry log of wood. Raven managed to roll in the air and land on her feet, staggering back in slight loss of control. But Helena was upon her again, her rod whipping in from behind. Raven haphazardly threw one sword in that direction, blocking the muscle-tearing onslaught of the rod. At the same time she threw her hand towards the sword, her other hand was already heralding a crude sword slash at Helena's flank. However, she exhibited a frightening flexibility, twisting and throwing her entire body upwards, barely dodging the attack by a hair's breadth. Using her rod as a stand, she twirled again, like a twisting snake, and threw bone-shattering kicks at Raven, who was too late to block. Raven staggered back and coughed. A line of blood slowly ran down her nose. Helena landed and placed the dark rod on her shoulders, raised her head and sneered. "What the hell? I thought you came with a lot of fight in you." Chapter 223. The Beauty of Battle. From the invisible embrace of darkness, Northern watched in keen observation as two lithe forms streaked against each other, carrying dim traces of light with every movement. Both figures were like dancing lightning, raging furiously against the clearing, crashing against each other with bone-shattering force. They were fast, they were strong. At a glance they looked evenly matched. Even if Northern didn't boast of an overwhelming experience when it came to the techniques, strategies, and tactics of battle, he at least knew what to look for. Plus, having all eyes made him able to see what others would not. For example, their movement. While it was blurringly fast, his eyes adapted frighteningly to every detail. His eyeballs kept shooting to and fro, following every movement in the corners of his eyes. Bullets of sweat marred his pale face. His mouth was slightly open as he watched. Raven was undoubtedly strong. He had never, of course, seen or faced her in battle. This was the first time. This was the first time he had seen anyone move like that. This was the first time he had seen such a frightening show of sword skill. Although it was only by a hair's breadth, Raven was managing to shake away the offenses of the feral lady. A little too consistent to be called a hair's breadth, in fact. Northern felt his heart beat tremendously. What he saw was so enlightening, it was so real. It was on another level compared to the feral battle style he had learned from Night Terror and other monsters. It was refined. It was smooth. It was swift, technical, and most especially, it was beautiful. Ah! I need to enter that place. Currently, Northern was donning two items that worked to erase his presence in darkness. The first one was Night Terror. So he was very sure that no matter how perceptive Helena the Sage was, she couldn't detect him that far into the depth of the darkness. And the second was the effect of a robe he had gotten from How. Item. Name. Shadow Cloak. Type. Charm. Rank. Arcane. Order. 3. Description. Once, the shadows were a veil that walked amidst men. They dressed and moved as one of us. However, they were betrayed. Charm abilities. Frigid Darkness. Black Veil. Shadow Step. Frigid Darkness. This cloak can manifest a shield of impenetrable darkness for as long as one's essence allows. Black Veil. When one dons this cloak, they become one with the darkness, merging completely with it. Shadow Step. It is possible to travel between shadows. With the Black Veil ability and Night Terror, Northern had no doubt he was as good as not being there, in fact. With lightning swiftness, he flopped over the short wall and threw a last glance at Helena and Raven. Better get that map before things start to get tough for her. While it did look amazing that Raven was doing very well, trying to hold up her defenses against the Sage and even managing to sneak in attacks, some were endearing rather than sneaky. In reality, however, she was struggling. First, she was breaking into sweats all over her face. Northern surmised that keeping up with such rapid movement of the Sage was taking its toll on her body. Another thing was they hadn't even started using their talent abilities. He remembered Raven had said her abilities were unfair, which means she must have experienced it before. Although she most likely would have been just a drifter then. Or maybe a nomad. Either way, Raven right now would probably have unfair abilities, but still, would it be enough to overpower the sage? Was it even possible to overpower the sage? Northern heaved one last sigh and walked inside nonchalantly. Since the door was slightly open, he didn't need to make any unnecessary noise. However, the moment he entered, the door made a slight creaking sound. This immediately caused Helena, who was locked in a tight and tense brawl with Raven, to throw her head back. Immediately, Raven's blades whipped towards her like tremendously vicious pythons, aiming to cleave her neck in one go. Even though late, Helena spun her rod, warding off the attempt and dove into Raven, twisting herself to lash a twirling kick that first aimed at the young lady's flank. As Raven blocked it with her arm, Helena twisted almost immediately, throwing another kick to her head that smashed Raven and caused her to stagger back. Helena crouched on the floor and, like a frog with a spring-like momentum, she dove again into Raven, this time hitting the young lady's stomach with her head. Raven curled like a piece of paper, coughing up blood and rolling away. Helena stood upright and placed the rod over her shoulder. She threw one more glance to the door. Was I imagining it? Helena was certain about her senses. She'd never doubt what she sensed, and when she sensed absolutely nothing, she'd never doubt it, too. Because too often, her sense of perception had proven itself to be the real deal. However, just now, it seemed like her door had made a slight creak despite her not perceiving anything. Helena narrowed her gaze, then turned it to Raven, who was standing on her knees and coughing. "Hey, silly!" she called out with her strong voice. "What are you even here for? What made you come here?" Raven was silent for a couple of seconds. Then she spat the rest of the blood in her mouth and looked at Helena. "Why else? I came to make a proposal for you. After stabbing me in the back, you came to make a proposal? I took you in, catered for you like a sister, and you dare steal from me? To make it worse, you came back having a proposal for me?" She laughed amazingly. "I have to give it to you, young one, you are indeed full of guts." Raven flinched for a second, remembering how she had left Helena's place with a really bad reputation. "I'm sorry, I stole from you. I had no choice." Raven raised her hands, and slowly, her weapons disintegrated into sparks of light and disappeared. Helena watched the young girl dismiss her weapons with a suspicious glare. "What do you think you are doing?" she inquired. Raven smiled. "I told you, I have a proposal for you. I didn't come here to fight you." Chapter 224. What Afghan Did Part 1. Helena had taken Raven in during her debacle with Afghan. One of the reasons why Helena, of course, decided to help was because she had heard that one of the girls Afghan took in as a wife tried to kill him. Afghan, over time, derailed from the sensible and purposeful young man that Helena once knew and loved to a terrifying and tyrannical leader, senseless and vile in the most foolish of ways. She had tried to kill him a couple of times, but the difference between a maverick rank and the transient rank is vast. Most of Afghan's misbehavior had started after he became an ascendant. 10 years ago, Sloria was in a worse shape, just as Lothelian was. Helena, Afghan, and 8 other students then suddenly found themselves in the middle of a throng of raging monsters. Fortunately for them, they were experienced drifters who were on the verge of becoming nomad ranks. Even though 10 people fighting off a raging crowd of monsters was not any easier. On that day, in that instance, they watched 4 of their mates die before their eyes. But they were able to find a safe space. Afghan took the deaths of those guys upon himself and decided to solo the monsters while others remained safe and found a haven to protect them. Afghan had an advantage, and even till now, no one knows what that advantage was, not even Helena. All they knew was that he went out at night and would come back in the morning bathed in the blood of monsters. This continued for days. Before the rest knew it, Afghan became a master. Protecting them became much easier. He single-handedly got rid of the monsters. Of course, being a force of so much power, people and authorities naturally gravitated towards him. Even Helena could have sworn her heart beat for the kind of man he was back then. There was no way to find a safe haven. Their only choice was to make one. And so, Afghan proposed that they build a stronghold together. People naturally accepted the idea. Barely did they survive the first year until suddenly 10 students appeared again. It was a strange phenomenon, and Afghan was heavily bothered by it. A little bit too bothered. Then someone from the new guys died. And it wasn't the doings of monsters. Blade marks were left crudely on the guy's chest. Deaths happen every now and then in a desolation like this. While everyone tried their best to investigate it, much attention couldn't be paid to it. The young and growing stronghold had to cater to other things after all. And monsters were still a high threat. They didn't have walls as high as they are now, then. And their number of battle-useful drifters was below average. The only variable was that the overall power of the stronghold was boosted by some special people like Afghan. And their numbers grew as each year passed, but every time they came, one of them usually died. 5 years later, Sloria was beginning to look less like a refugee center and more like a stronghold. People, not just the students that were being teleported yearly but Slorians, began to come around. Strong ones were selected to join Afghan's army, which at that time were referred to as Protectors of the Dusk. Simply because they were created to shield and protect whatever was left of Sloria, its fallen state, its night, its dusk. The weak were protected, the strong were privileged. But this was not enough. The monsters were just too much. If they truly wanted to protect whatever was left of Sloria, they needed to enter into the rifts. The skepticism that could be seen on Afghan's face when they were faced with this decision could be seen. No one understood why he was hesitating so much. After all, he was the strongest person in the stronghold and a master. After being pressured so much by the needfulness of the situation, Afghan decided to call a special meeting between his 6 generals, which included Helena. That was where he informed them of his interactions with the Lewingard Empire, and that they had specially informed him not to enter any gates. In response to that, Lewingard would send supplies, war and welfare supplies to the Sloria stronghold. They would hunt monsters and pay the monster corpses as tributes to the empire. They didn't even ask for the cores, hence all the cores were monopolized by Afghan. This was another reason for his quick progression to an ascendant. It was an edge no one had, and it was the reason why he stayed the strongest in the city. During this discussion was when a major disagreement began between Afghan and his generals. Some believed he made a very crucial decision without informing them about it. When did the empire visit? Or did he visit the empire? What exactly was going on? And what was Afghan hiding from them? 3 of Afghan's generals disagreed and proposed that Afghan should step down from his position as a leader. The other 3 were loyal to Afghan to a fault, including Helena, who at that time unconditionally loved and followed him, even though he never looked at her once. Of course, Afghan would never leave his position. This disagreement tore the stronghold into 2 factions, one led by a nomad at the time called Tarek. Tarek soon became a master but was not even as strong as Afghan, although he had dependable allies and was cunning in his ways. He was going to kill Afghan, however, even if it had to be by poison. And he did try to poison Afghan. Afghan was very close to dying, but the Lewingard Empire did send knights to receive their tributes of monster corpses. That graceless and crude night, only 3 knights were all it took to decimate Tarek and his faction. Afghan's authority was reinforced with the help from the empire and the constant supplies. The people continued to believe and follow Afghan. And Afghan, drunken by absolute power, began to slowly change, demanding that every pretty lady should be brought down to his palace as maids. It was better that they serve him than be killed by monsters. And strangely, even though it was sad, the people considered living with Afghan a better choice than living within the stronghold premises itself. They saw leaving their children to Afghan as a privilege of service. Moreover, the parents themselves received a tag that permitted free supply of meals and priority of protection. In a desolation like this, those that gave their daughters to Afghan lived like nobles. Over time, people wished they had daughters. Some even kidnapped young girls and claimed to be their parents. All sorts of crimes arose with Afghan's absurd practices. With this level of crimes even came an even stronger and stricter level of control from Afghan. Time passed, and Helena only saw this as madness. Then the 8th set of students appeared, and Afghan tried to kill not just one, but all of them. Chapter 225. What Afghan did Part 2. It would have been impossible to cover a massacre of such level. It was also one that could not be neglected. But the actual flaw in Afghan's plan this time was that someone saw it happen. And it was none other than his beloved Helena. One of the very few people who had stuck with him since day one when he didn't even ask them to. Afghan knew how precious Helena was, because at this point, the number of students who were the first to arrive were just 4, including him and Helena. Even though Helena saw him massacre 10 students in a single night, he couldn't do much about it. All he did was tell her not to get in his way because of what she had seen, as it could be detrimental for both of them. Helena naturally struggled with making sense of what happened. To make it worse, she was already at that point where her love for Afghan was diminishing. The drunkenness of power was slowly beginning to ruin him. He was no more that caring, purposeful young man that she had known. After the Civil War and they started paying tribute to the Lewingard Empire, Afghan became very cold towards everyone. He changed. For several months, she questioned herself and didn't know what to do. Regardless, she had to stick with Afghan. She felt he needed her. He was heading towards destruction, and she felt her love could be the last good thing he had. Even amidst this power-drunken state, Helena had seen Afghan break down and cry like a baby, saying he wanted to go home. She had seen him freak out, screaming, "You don't know them. It's because you don't know them. They are monsters. No, they are much worse." These times had made her wonder what exactly it was that Afghan had gone through with the Lewingard Empire, what exactly had transpired between the two. But she could also relate to the things he said. After all, before her eyes, 3 men clad in white armor with a sigil of a red cross engraved broadly on their front single-handedly decimated half the stronghold. The sight was bone-chilling. If these people wanted, she was sure they could close all the available gates. So why were they preventing that from happening? Why were they preventing Afghan from going? It baffled her so much, and made her doubt everything she was beginning to see. On one of the days of these Afghan breakdowns, he told her the one truth that no one was supposed to know. The truth that Afghan knew about Ruffsberg's plans. The old man had promised them that this was a project to make them strong, and that when the time was right, they would suddenly come back home. However, 6 years later, Afghan had not heard a single message from Ruffsberg. And yet every day he kept feeding students the same lies. Afghan, however, found out that Ruffsberg was using the students as gateways. Every student that knew about his plan was used as some kind of gateway to redirect his teleportation, which meant at the very least, Ruffsberg could have come to check up on them if he wanted. But he didn't. This hell was getting unbearable for them to live in. That man was seeing it happen and didn't care. Afghan began to rise with rage. This rage was what caused the massacre of all 10 students that came the 6th year. Afghan killed every other student Ruffsberg used before, so that the sly old man wouldn't have another alternative to use except him. He was scared of getting betrayed. When Helena found out about this, a lot changed. The way she saw Afghan changed. She was ridden with a primal anger. Afghan knew what this place was and still let all of them come. But at the same time, a part of her understood him. Because she had watched him take all the burden upon himself, most times single-handedly dealing with things. Perhaps that was all his guilty conscience and desperate struggle to keep them all alive, even though he still could not. She understood that Afghan must feel very horrible and responsible for the death of those guys. While she did try to understand his standpoint, it was impossible for her to trust and follow him anymore. This began to cause a drift between the two, one that the other 2 survivors who were his other generals were worried about. Helena paid heed to no one, explained nothing to anyone, and instead just slowly separated herself from them. The height of this event, however, was the 7th year when Afghan again tried to kill all 10 students. And she, knowing why it was happening, tried to stop him. Their fight was immense and scene-shattering. At that time, Afghan was already a sage while she was on the verge of becoming a savant. Hence, she suffered an eye-opening defeat. One that made her advance to the maverick rank and become a savant. Due to this, she experienced an extraordinary reformation of her body. Afghan could have killed her right there but did not. Instead, he turned away with just 6 words. "Bye, Helena. Let's never meet again." And that was the last time they met as friends. The other time was when Helena tried to stop Afcon from killing all the students, and she always stopped each time. Even when she became a sage, she looked forward to the 9th year. She was sure that she'd be able to stop him now. Only to find Afcon had awakened as a completely different person and had become an ascendant. An ascendant had a vast change in their body. While the lower ranks also affected the body, it was only internal and only affected the physical abilities of the body, tremendously increasing it. But ascendants were different. It is said that they have reached a new depth of their soul and touched its true essence, thus awakening something called a unique talent. A unique talent was a talent ability that was on a different level as compared to the rest. It was inscribed on their bodies and gave them a unique body property that made them near invincible. They also gained more lifespan. What happened between Helena and Afcon that day was not a fight. No, it was no fight. It was a one-sided ass-whooping. Afcon beat Helena to a pulp while killing several students at the same time. Chapter 226. Four-Eyed Abomination. Helena stood squared, with her black rod over her shoulder, slowly tapping it while her gaze sat warily on Raven. Raven was also looking with a dangerous spark dancing in her eyes. "Where is it first?" Helena outstretched her hand. "Where is what you stole from me? I can't return it to you." Helena's brows furrowed. She glared at Raven for a few seconds and scratched her neck. "Are you testing me? Or are you just that dumb? I helped you when you were about to be killed by Afcon, sheltered and protected you, even helped you escape, only to find out you stole my precious shield." She took a moment to breathe. Usually, when someone says they have a proposal to one that they've strongly wronged, they come with a way to right their wrongs. "You worm, the only way to right your wrong is to return that raven heart to me. Even after returning it, I don't think I'm ready to let you walk away from this place in one piece." Raven stared at her absent-mindedly for a while. Then she lowered her eyes and said in a somber tone, "I can't return the Ravenheart shield for obvious reasons. And I still want you to take this offer because it could be our only cue to returning home." Helena froze, and blinked a couple of times. "Huh? What did you say now?" Meanwhile, upon entering, Northern stifled his nose with 2 fingers to block out the thick air saturated with the scent of aged parchment and exotic spices. The interior was cozy yet eclectic. Against one wall, a rustic bookshelf groaned under the weight of leather-bound tomes and well-thumbed journals. Tattered maps, their edges frayed with use, adorned the walls. Northern paused in front of the maps for a while, studying them. He placed his hand beneath his chin. "It's almost as if she's looking for something." The maps were like pieces of puzzles desperately trying to fit together. One look at them and Northern could tell of the desperate efforts Helena was putting in pursuit of something. Maybe it was something, someone or somewhere, he did not know. But one thing he did know was that Helena is currently searching, or maybe was. This does not seem to have been here for a while. Northern turned his head to a corner, where sat a sturdy oak desk that served as the heart of the cottage. Its surface cluttered with half-finished sketches, cryptic notes, and artifacts waiting to be catalogued. A flickering oil lamp cast a warm glow over the scene, illuminating the intricate carvings adorning the desk's legs. Nearby, a plush armchair beckoned invitingly, its cushions worn with age but still offering comfort to weary visitors. A hand-woven rug, its intricate patterns reminiscent of ancient symbols, covered the worn wooden floor, muffling the sound of footsteps and adding to the cozy ambience. The centerpiece of the room was a massive stone pillar, its rough-hewn surface a testament to the cottage's sturdy construction, rising majestically to support the timber-framed roof above. For a while Northern stood dumbfounded, admiring the structure and wondering exactly how Helena had managed to build a place like this. Although there existed the possibility that she could have just found this place, Northern didn't think so. This place looked too rough on the edges to not have been built by Helena herself. Northern let out a soft sigh and turned back to the direction of the table, and suddenly heard a slight sound. It was subtle, he was sure there was a sound. It was impossible for him to make a sound because night terror was supposed to shield him completely in darkness. That meant that this was a much greater ability than just becoming invisible. Northern was like a moving darkness, although not an obviously visible one. It was equivalent to say he was not here at all, so how could he have made a sound? This caused Northern to squint his eyes. Someone is here. From the invisible depths of the darkness, blue light subtly emanated from Northern's eyes as he dove into the weaves of the reality around him, using the unseeing eyes. Processing hundreds of millions of interwoven azure threads all at the same time made him feel like his brain was continually tearing apart and mending together, especially in this moment where he was trying to see beyond plain reality. Each thread pulsated with an unseen energy that weaved every fabric of existence. These ethereal strands danced and intertwined, forming an intricate lattice that stretched across the expanse of reality, connecting every particle and possibility in a mesmerizing symphony of light and shadow. Amidst this web of intertwined threads was a subtle disturbance in the delicate weave of reality. A slow but moving ripple that danced on a couple of threads that strewn across the sturdy table and plush chair, like a pebble dropped into a still pond, creating subtle eddies and currents that hinted at something. Northern could tell in that instance. "Caught you, bastard!" He headed towards the area and slowly extended his hand to touch the disturbed thread. In that moment, the thread straightened as if being put back to order by his slight touch. Simultaneously, a figure with wavy, shoulder-length jet-black hair froze in movement, blinking as he observed that he could see himself. What's going on? His form again began to fade away, but at the last moment flickered and faded back to reality. The man looked at himself and tried again. This time, it didn't work at all. He just flickered like a faulty bulb of light and found himself standing, obvious and visible to everyone with his elegant white armor. He frowned and looked away, slowly moving the black scroll in his hand to his breastplate. Before he could, however, something slapped his hand, causing the scroll to fall and roll. Immediately, he threw himself forward to grab it, but something was faster than him. Black lustrous hands picked the scroll. The enigmatic figure slowly stood straight, staring at him with 4 blue eyes. Instantly, the man felt cold sweat drip down his body. His hands and lips tremble at the sight of the abomination. Chapter 227. The Conviction of a Nimrod Worm, Part 1. Of course, if there was one person desperately yearning to return to the Central Plains from this desolate land, it would be none other than Helena. She herself had inadvertently inspired Raven's motives without even realizing it. Long before Raven's brief stay with her, immediately after parting ways with Afcon and venturing out alone, Helena had relentlessly searched for a way back home. The first possibility she explored was traveling by sea. She didn't have to pass through Lewingard, in fact. They, after all, were not the only seaport on this island. However, other ports had fallen under the dominion of monsters. If she were to attempt that route, she would have to reclaim the area, construct a vessel while fending off rift creatures more often than not. As desperate as she was to escape this desolation, she, unlike someone else, recognized the fine line between recklessness and foolishness. So, she had never actually committed to that path. However, she had ventured to the other ports, conducting numerous explorations and uncovering several facts. Raven had witnessed her casually discuss them, and Raven was convinced that there was much more, so much more that Helena knew but was not revealing. There was probably no one in this entire desolation as knowledgeable as she was, even when accounting for the natives. Raven had personally verified this fact herself. The natives didn't even know half of what Helena did. So while the map they came to steal was crucial, her hidden agenda was to persuade Helena to join them. The map plan she had proposed was a contingency in case Helena refused to accompany them. Of course, she had skillfully kept this truth concealed from both her cohorts. Helena scratched her head in stunned silence. After hearing Raven's words, she could have sworn a fleeting sense of hopefulness washed over her, if only for a second. But then she recalled how foolish Raven was. The disparity between Afcon and herself was evident, yet she still boldly attempted to kill him. If there was one thing she understood, it was the fact that Raven was too consumed by conviction to possess common sense. restrain herself, or even consider the danger she might be putting others in. She was likely a simpleton who believed that everything would fall into place given time. Rather than controlling the tide, she would ride it, that sort of person. Helena let out a long sigh. But there was something that still perplexed her. She was certain that Raven had a serious confrontation with Afghan. Given Afghan's immense power, she couldn't fathom how Raven managed to escape, let alone as a mere drifter or perhaps a nomad. She wasn't sure. She at least knew that the beautiful, stubborn girl she had known a couple of months ago was not a master. Even as a master, fleeing from an ascendant was akin to a child attempting to extricate himself from quicksand. It was very, very, very impossible. And yet this girl had somehow managed precisely that, without even being a master. Helena was curious. She squinted her eyes, diverting from the main discussion. How did you manage to escape Afghan again? Raven responded without amusement. I didn't escape. We fought, I won, but there was no way I could have killed him. My weapon shattered against his skin. Helena blinked, remaining silent, but obvious surprise gleamed on her entire face. Of course, there were certain kinds of weapons that could slay an ascendant. Usually, weapons of the lordly rank and above could always accomplish the task. But it also depended on the unique body formation the ascendant possessed. And there were diverse formations, always finding their root in the soul and their link in constellations. As a sage, even Helena was still uncovering the immense role constellations played in their soul formations, and a semblance of it was beginning to reflect in her own soul. Perhaps Afghan, an ascendant, would understand better, and she was sure a paragon would have fully realized this enlightenment she pursued. They, after all, were said to exist in a different realm of power entirely, capable of wielding special abilities such as the mental world and stellar unification. It was such a realm that Afghan was a step away from. And yet, this girl claimed to have defeated him? It made no sense. Helena scoffed. I almost believed you for a moment. Raven frowned slightly. He let his guard down and decided to fight me without using his talent abilities. He was mistaken to think he had a better grasp of raw battle than I did. I grew up in a family of killers. Her tone seemed to rise slightly, but her expression remained unchanged. Helena studied her. What did she mean by growing up in a family of killers? She was curious. But that was not going to make her foolish enough to entertain this stubborn girl's delusions. Raven was delusional, and what awaited delusional kids like her was nothing but death. Helena let out another sigh and stood her rod on the ground, gently leaning on it. It was quite remarkable how the weapon remained steady despite her weight on it. Even Raven almost spared it a glance, but Helena spoke. Look, Worm, it might take some time due to your stubbornness, but you will eventually realize how stupid and delusional you are. She leaned away from the black rod and folded her arms. I just hope that when you do, it's not too late, and you have not dragged many people into the hell you are creating. Raven frowned in confusion. All I'm trying to do is return home. What's so wrong with that? The feral sage suppressed a laugh, then looked at Raven. Return home? Seriously? I thought you were just a worm. Who knew you were a Nimrod too? The laugh she was holding back managed to escape, but she quickly halted it and glared at Raven. Look at me, kid. I've been here for the past 10 years. You think I have not searched for every possible way to leave this damned continent and make Rugsburg pay for throwing me into this hell? You probably have searched, but have not tried. Helena's gaze froze on Raven for a few seconds. Then she tilted her head back slightly, sounding frustrated. What more could I possibly do? This stubborn worm's eyes seemed to glow with a more bloody spark than usual as she said, The rifts. You have never even been to one of them. Helena's gaze became weary, visible lines of stress formed beneath them. Chapter 228. The Conviction of a Nimrod Worm, Part 2. Why are you all so afraid? What are you guys so afraid of? Helena remained ensnared in silence as Raven bombarded her with probing questions. Sealing the rifts may not guarantee a path home, but you must realize it will fortify you. render you powerful enough to confront the terrors lurking in the sea's depths. Raven paused, contemplating, before fixing her gaze upon Helena. Are you not even already formidable enough to face such horrors? All you require is a team of equal might. She took a step closer, meeting Helena with an expression of disarming honesty. For now, I am merely a master. Maybe I lack the strength to match your prowess, but I am confident of my potential. Once this journey concludes, I will become a sage. Helena studied Raven. The feral sage had maintained a tense, grave demeanor until this moment. Now, she simply chuckled and shook her head in bemusement. Foolish worm, enough of your prattle. Give me my shield. Raven's intense stare bored into Helena's. Silence stretched between them for a few heartbeats. Then Raven stated once more, I will become a sage. Helena raised her head to the young woman before her, a hint of laughter lacing her tone.
No, worm.
Unless your journey demands 3 years of relentless monster slaying, you'll never become a sage. Raven's gaze intensified in the silence. Then, after some moments passed, she spoke again. Shall we wager then? Helena arched an eyebrow as Raven continued. My team and I will be sages upon our return. By then, will you join us to seal the rifts? Helena's grin widened, her eyes glinting with a wild spark. Very well, worm. I accept your challenge. If you have not become a sage by the time you return, you'll merely fall prey to Afcon and perish. Even as a sage, I doubt whether it would be feasible to slay Afcon. I cannot defeat him myself. Raven frowned. That may be true for you. I bested him as a mere drifter. Helena's skeptical gaze lingered on Raven's confident features. She then let out a weary sigh, shaking her head. Whatever, worm, whatever. She shot Raven a glare, stomping the weapon upon the ground. But you will return my shield. Raven's frown deepened. She positioned herself, hands poised to summon her twin blades once more. Helena regarded her with a puzzled expression. Have you taken leave of your senses? You stole from me, and you stubbornly refused to return it. You'd even resort to combat rather than surrender what you stole. Raven nodded resolutely. It is important to me. Helena's brow furrowed slightly. I'm uncertain how to process you saying that a shield you stole from me is important to you. What makes it so important? Raven raised 2 fingers. There are 2 reasons.
I'm listening.
Raven elucidated. 1. It can make me fly, and I will be needing that a lot on the journey ahead. Helena's frown persisted as she mulled this over, then queried. And 2. Raven glanced away, a hint of embarrassment tinging her features. Then. Her voice was scarcely audible. Speak up before I lose it. Raven met Helena's gaze, proclaiming with conviction. It's my namesake. Ha! Helena stared, dumbstruck. You claim what now? Ravenheart. My name is Raven. Ha! Helena fell silent for a few seconds, utterly nonplussed by this development. So, what of it? I need to possess it. Merely because it bears your name? Raven shook her head adamantly. Not solely for that reason. I intend to investigate this item's source. I wish to uncover its origins. Why? Why should you care? It's naught but a weapon, an object like any other. That it echoes your name is mere happenstance. Why obsess over it? Raven frowned, dropping her gaze briefly. Then she looked squarely at Helena and retorted. I cannot give you my reasons, but I believe they may guide me to someone I lost long ago. Helena facepalmed, exhaling a protracted sigh. At this juncture, little worm, simply do as you will. Arguing with you is making me feel like my head may soon tear apart. In that moment, crash, a man in white armor erupted through Helena's cottage, tumbling into the soil. What? Helena whipped her head around instantly. Even Raven frowned slightly. For one, she was quite certain that was not Northern. Damn it! I tried to handle this smoothly. Northern muttered as he marched deliberately from the wooden dwelling. Immediately, Helena's gaze fell upon the four-eyed abomination, her entire body quaking with visceral dread. Her eyes flew wide. "What in the Stelia's hell is that?" Raven frowned. "My teammate, I apologize." Then she let a small smile grace her lips as she observed Northern advancing on the man in white armor. Helena looked down at the man desperately scrambling from the approaching abomination, her brow furrowing. "Isn't that Reno? What business does he have here?" Helena turned to Raven. "Wait, what did you utter just now? Member of your team?" Raven, her eyes alight as she watched Northern, turned and nodded vigorously at Helena. Pride radiated from every facet of her expression. Meanwhile, Northern's tail snaked forth, coiling around the fleeing man's leg and hoisting him aloft. Northern seized his leg, smashing him brutally into the ground with a thunderous tremor shaking the area. He then fixed his gaze on the stunned, silent Raven and Helena, especially Helena. The plate of his helmet swiftly retracted into his collar, leaving the devilish horn crowning his head. Any who glimpsed him could only perceive a demonic spawn. "I'm sorry, I sought to conclude this cleanly. But this one was stronger than I thought and put up more resistance, necessitating greater force than intended." Helena's stare remained transfixed on Northern's full, grotesque visage for a long moment. Then she looked to the man he had subjugated. "What are you doing?" "That's one of Afghan's generals. Reno the Invisible Warrior." Northern canted his head slightly. Afghan, ah yes. That one." He gestured toward Raven as he remembered. She, meanwhile, observed with an intense, scrutinizing glare. Helena's voice resounded. "Yes, him. What business have you with Reno? How is he even visible?" Northern shrugged nonchalantly. "I suspect I may have dispelled his invisibility." "Oh, and he was attempting to steal your belongings." Chapter 229. Make it make sense. There was a degree to which common sense was supposed to make sense. Some things just exceeded mortal reasoning. And from the vantage point of a mortal, it may not necessarily be transcendent knowledge or celestial revelation. It may just be that it makes no sense, because it is practically impossible. This was the perfect explanation that could be given to what Northern had just said. Undid his invisibility? That made absolutely no sense. Reno was one of the Afghan's generals, although he wasn't with their group and only arrived in Stelia in the 4th year. He was special in a way. His ability, while it may not boast overwhelming combat prospects, had unrivaled usefulness in stealth. And because of this, Afghan had grown especially fond of him. Reno could sneak up on practically anything, even a sleeping maelstrom. And when he became a master, much more changed. He could even completely erase his presence from reality. He could walk, speak, and pick things up. No one would know he was there. Whenever he erased his presence from a plane of reality, and not even Helena, who was extraordinarily perceptive, could notice him. And yet this guy casually said, "I suspect I may have dispelled his invisibility." Helena's brows came together, tense and conflicted. This was the greatest nonsense she had heard in a while. And Reno? Reno was on the ground, writhing from the heavy smash just now. What was even that? The way he carried him as if he was a rag doll and smashed him onto the ground like he wasn't applying a reasonable amount of force. Reno might not boast tremendous combat prowess, but he was a savant. A maverick rank drifter was no joke. In Reno's case, who had a fragile physicality, he still surpassed every regular drifter. Helena grimaced. This person had to be a master. There was no other explanation. First, she had to settle with the fact that what she thought was a frightening monster was an actual human. A drifter. On that course of thought, she couldn't help but wonder. Where did he get the armor? What horror did he fight? Secondly, Raven, this little worm, was said to be her teammate. How could she have this strong and Helena's face became as red as a tomato as she unbelievably stared at Northern's pale face. How can someone be so handsome? On the inside, she was burning, freaking out, but on the outside, she was as calm as water, face reddened though, and eyes fixed on Northern, who stood aloof after saying what he said. The situation was almost awkward for a bit as Helena stood in prolonged silence and kept staring at Northern. Raven then made a slight movement which sort of jacked her out of her head. She swiftly turned her head to the said little worm and said, "Is this your team? The ones that will become sages when you come back?" Raven was silent for a while. She was either taking her time to reply or trying to provoke Helena. After a couple of seconds, she responded, "Not just that. I am sure you would have noticed that one of the rifts is gone." Helena frowned slightly. "I figured your stronghold had started taking them down one by one." Raven nodded. "Indeed, it was our plan. But before we could, someone single-handedly conquered one.
Other rift.
She raised her head and looked at Northern, who was fixed on his opponent that was standing. Then she added, "And as a walker." Helena staggered back a little, unbelief breaking out on her wild face. She squinted her eyes. That is impossible. It makes no sense, theoretically and practically. Even a master would find it hard to seal a Tier V rift, and you are telling me someone did it as a walker?" Raven smiled, her face warm. Then she nodded. "I was as freaked out as you when I saw it too. We entered the rift to bring him out. Everything had already ended." Helena observed the dead serious look on Raven's face. Raven was so simple that you would find her face readable if she was lying or bluffing. Although Helena also knew that she wasn't the kind to bluff or lie. This claim of hers, however, was just too unrealistic to believe. But Raven's eyes showed no doubts or dishonesty. Helena thought for a while, then asked cautiously, "What rank is he now?" "Drifter." Immediately, a laugh broke out of Helena's lips. It was a laugh of unbelief. "This is just absurd. Really absurd." She turned and looked at Northern, narrowing her eyes. He, the subject of the matter, slowly, seductively in Helena's eyes, turned after making sure that Reno wouldn't be standing anytime soon. Helena immediately turned her face. This defied all common sense. He was probably a kid, and she was an adult. She couldn't have her heart jumping for a— Wait. Isn't this thought already going too far? Helena let out a prolonged sigh and stood akimbo, dropping her head for a while before looking at Raven, with a frown. "Are you serious?" Raven replied, "I have no reason not to be." She paused and looked at Helena. "Are you inclined to see the possibility of our quest?" Helena arched her brow and looked at her for seconds that seemed to prolong into a minute. She then looked away to Northern. "Honestly, until now, I think you are just being reckless. But you are walking with a drifter who seems to be a very strong proof that anything can be possible. This makes the chances of success rise, even if it is by a barely noticeable %." She folded her arms and looked at Raven. "But no, I still think you guys are about to get yourselves killed." She lingered for a while, then with a suspicious look, asked Raven, "Hey, you worm, where the hell are you going? This journey of yours that makes you so certain that you'll be sages when you come back. Where is it?" Raven was silent for a while. Then she looked at her with a dangerous black spark igniting in the depth of her eyes and said, "The Sleeping Mountains." Immediately upon hearing those words, Helena's face paled. She began to sweat bullets, even. Chapter 230, Arrogant Bitch. Northern, seeing the direction the conversation was heading, removed his attention from the oppressed Reno and turned to listen to Helena and Raven. From his point of view, there wasn't much difference between the two in height and stature, although Raven boasted a slightly taller physique. However, Helena had more muscles, lean and taut, although most of her body was exposed while it was the other way around for Raven. It was not possible to say if Raven's muscles were as tight as Helena's. And Northern didn't think so. She still looked tender before his eyes. Another difference was their faces. Helena had a wild, troublesome face, brunette hair, and beautiful brown eyes. Even from the distance he stood. Raven had jet black hair, as black as Reno's, distinguished crimson eyes, and a genteel look with a subtle hint of catastrophe managing to weave itself around that gentility. It was amazing how a straight-looking young girl could be so twisted. Northern shook his head slightly as he watched both of them. Just as Raven said, "The Sleeping Mountains." And Helena began to sweat bullets. The Sleeping Mountains? That was where they were going. "I wonder if it's a mountain that sleeps," Northern bemused jokingly. He was still paying attention when a froggy chuckle reached him from beneath. He looked down at the guy chuckling. Reno was trying to get up and was laughing at the same time, which caused Northern to raise an inquisitive brow. What in hell was funny? "While I do admit that you two are a strong bunch, Raven Light and this man." He coughed and paused. "Going to the Sleeping Mountains is suicidal." Northern looked at him with confusion. Then he looked at Raven, who was standing opposite him. His eyes were begging for an explanation. What exactly were the Sleeping Mountains to warrant such a reaction from a sage? And the nonsense that this guy was spitting? Raven looked at Reno and frowned. "I intend to prove you all wrong." That frown. It made Northern utterly uncomfortable, because he could tell this was her being reckless again. She had not told him the complete story of what they were pursuing. Stealing the map and killing a Maelstrom-rank monster were supposed to be the highlights of the beginning of this strange expedition. But really, what was she chasing and why? Even if it was the freedom of everyone, why was she choosing to do this? There was an airship, isn't there? She had claimed there was, and even said she would give it to Northern to find his way home. His journey would be way easier. He would be able to avoid whatever horrors dwelled in the depths of the sea and continually attacked Central Plains' border. But also, wasn't Raven concerned about going home? Really, why was she doing all of this? The question was so mind-boggling that prolonged thought made his head hurt. Raven. He knew whatever she had planned was very dangerous, but maybe he was underestimating how dangerous it might be. "I know that it doesn't matter what I say, you'll just end up doing what you want. Just like that time too." Raven looked at Reno, who was now standing on his feet, slightly wary of Northern's furrowed brow and intense scrutiny. "While I do appreciate you for your help, I also do not intend to become lackadaisical, lethargic, laid back, and comfortable like you guys. The only way out of this desolation is moving forward, whether it's the Sleeping Mountains or Sea of Horrors, be it the heavens or all kinds of hell. I will break through it to stand as the supreme victor and conqueror of Stelia." Her words were resolute. The confidence she spoke with could almost be touched. But Northern wasn't impressed in any way. He had his opinion. He was just going to keep it to himself. However, as if Reno read his mind, his mouth parted, asking the same question Northern had thought of. "Why? Why are you so ambitious?" Raven looked at him with a very blank expression. Anyone could tell, with the way she cluelessly tilted her head, that she was very lost. She lingered for a while, then opened her mouth and asked, "I don't understand your question. Are you not ambitious?" Reno's expression froze. For a second, he felt like he was talking to a robot, a programmed, mechanized essence of existence with no common reasoning and emotion. Reno looked around and freed an exasperated sigh. "What is there to have ambition about, Raven? Look at us. We are surrounded by nothing but hollowness, horrors left and right. The only thing we can do is survive with whatever we have. Being ambitious in a place like this will ruin whatever is left of the life we have." Raven was silent, thinking. Then she opened her mouth. "So, you are saying, rather than be ambitious even if it costs your life, you'll rather be a coward, a fool, living in the slavery of your own mind when you could be fighters and liberators who not only fought for the freedom of the life handed to them by a cruel bastard but also for the freedom from fate's gruesome grasp on them." She shook her head. "I always knew everyone in Sloria was stupid and unintelligent. I just never thought it was this deep." Northern's mouth fell open. What was it with all the sharp words? Raven turned to Helena. "I believe I have said more than enough. I know how dangerous the Sleeping Mountains are, but it is the only way forward." She looked at Northern. "Do you have the map?" Northern nodded. Then he turned his head to Reno with a deep frown. "This guy here also tried to steal it. His eyes, however, widened the moment he belatedly realized the owner of the map was still standing amidst them. And yet, Raven casually mentioned it like that? Wasn't the entire point of this operation so that Helena did not find out she was stolen from? Meanwhile, Helena, whose eyes were tightly closed, with a vein or two threatening to pop out of her forehead, turned to Raven. Her black rod was already in her hand, grips tightening viciously around it. With a seething but stifled voice, she said, "Hey Raven, you!" She paused, gripping the rod even tighter, her muscles rolling dangerously. "You must be a very arrogant bitch." Chapter 231, Benign Sincerity. "Forget it. I'm done trying to make sense with this bitch." Helena, consumed by fury, lunged at Raven, who immediately shot back in a flash, almost staggering as she landed. But Helena was already upon her again, so there was no moment of respite for her. Much worse, there was little to no time for her to summon her weapon. "Please wait," Raven exclaimed, albeit softly, as Helena drove in her staff from the left with an explosive force. "Hum!" The malevolent staff went over Raven's head as she ducked. She threw a leg slightly forward but with much more force than needed, giving Helena a bone-shattering low kick. The feral sage's leg faltered, causing her to lose balance and almost fall. Immediately, Raven grabbed her head and drove her knee to smash Helena's pretty face. But that knee did not make it. Helena, with a powerful palm thrust, sent Raven's knee back. Not just that. The thrust was so powerful that Raven tumbled and smacked her face on the floor. It was like an object was about to roll in a certain direction, and it was hit hard enough in the opposite direction. The object could break, even considering the force of the hit and the momentum of its initial movement. Luckily for Raven, the ground was sandy. She stood and spat out sand from her mouth, all her face smeared by white sand. "Please try to understand. This was necessary. There's no way I will reach the Sleeping Mountains without your map. Like I care whether you reach there or not. First, you steal a heroic rank weapon from me. Then you try to steal a map that I almost lost my life trying to remove from the ruins of Alcava. And you come here to tell me to try to understand? It was necessary?" Helena's eyes gleamed with madness. "Killing you won't be enough, you worm." She lashed out her rod and dashed forward, with such magnifying speed that the sands spread apart. However, Raven was already holding two stilettos, which were crossed over her face, hooking the rod in between to keep its tip from dismantling her eyes. She threw her hands away, causing the rod to fly up and Helena to stagger back. Raven dove in sharply and swung her dagger toward the feral sage's neck. Helena, however, did not move. She just frowned, a very deep frown. In that moment, Raven stopped her onslaught, felt cold sweat behind her neck, and jumped as far away as she could from Helena with a burdened look on her face. Northern, who was watching, couldn't help but ask why. He, at the very least, didn't observe anything. Reno was also standing beside him. The guy seemed less curious than he was, so he must know. Northern looked at him and looked at the other two ladies that stood apart from each other, with a dangerous tension wafting in the air. "Damn. I'm so novice about these things. What went wrong?" Reno looked at him with a blank expression. They were enemies, weren't they? But he smiled and responded. "Will you then tell me how you managed to see me? I have these amazing eyes and an ability that negates your own." Reno was silent for a while, his eyes focused on the ground and hands beneath his chin. Then he looked at Northern, smiled handsomely, and nodded. "I see, fair enough." He turned to the two ladies. "Well, there was nothing much, just that Helena just now was about to use her talent ability. Those two must have been fighting till now without using their abilities." "Oh, I see. Nothing special," Reno added. "If Raven didn't jump back just now, she most likely would be dead by now. That's how powerful Helena is, or has become." He ended with a slight frown. With that look on his face, many questions rose in Northern's head. He knew about Helena's history with Afcon from the little Raven had told him. He also knew now that this was Afcon's general. Probably one of the people that were being sent here over the course of 10 years. In order to confirm, he still had to ask. So, you came on the same year with Afcon? Reno looked up at him. Oh no, Helena, Afcon, Reyus, and Shayana are all that are left of the first year. I'm from the 5th year. And I'm guessing you are from this year, Raven said. Never seen your face, though. Northern frowned as he remembered. Yeah. I've been in a rift all the while. Reno blinked at him. Been in a rift? How does that work? Northern sighed. Trust me, you wouldn't understand or believe. He refocused his attention on the two, leaving Reno to think whatever. The guy's furtive glare stayed on him for a couple more seconds before Raven spoke again. Even though she was already speaking before. I did not come here without an offer that will suit you. I came here so I can pay for it all. Helena grimaced. Pay for it all? Pay for it all? How exactly are you planning to pay for it all, you bastard? I took you in and protected you. Guess how you pay me back? Stealing from me. I've not even begun to pay you back. I will pay you back by making sure you return to the Central Plains. By making sure you return to your family, even if it costs me my life to do so. I will make sure of it. Helena paused, stared at Raven. How could she necessarily kill her when she goes ahead spitting touching words like that? While Helena appreciated how concerned Raven was about her, she also thought she was going too far for the people she doesn't even know. But the truth was, she knew Raven had nothing to gain. And she also knew, she, of all people, probably doesn't want to go to the Central Plains at all. For everyone that got sent here, it was a curse. But for Raven, it was probably a blessing. As to why, only Helena in this entire desolation knew. Raven continued talking. The reward I have for you now is that we are ready. Helena looked at her. Ready for what? The creature in the woods. The three of us should be able to hunt it. Chapter 232. A Strange and Odd Combination, Part 1. She glanced at Northern, while Helena raised an eyebrow, then lowered both afterwards. Are you insane? Even Afcon wouldn't dream of challenging a Maelstrom rank monster, much less an apex danger level. Stop with all your nonsense. Raven, just leave. Raven shook her head. I am telling you, we three can kill that monster. Hasn't that always been your lifelong goal? To get back at it for all the cruel things it had made people do to each other. Helena stared at her as she continued. Northern here has resistance to mind attacks, and you also have your way of protecting yourself. What about you? Helena interrupted. You are vulnerable to it and might end up blurting out all the cruel things you've got planned. Raven carved a pale smile. I'll be fine, or so I believe. I'll be sane enough to land meaningful attacks here and there. Northern, however, stepped forward. He looked at Helena, then at Raven, and then Helena again. Both of them looked back, paused, and observed him. Observing him closely. He was barely 5 meters away from them. Reno was still standing back 8 meters. I have something that will protect you from mind attacks. So yes, it should be possible. Raven's eyes widened. Oh, you do. Helena looked at him, looked at Raven, who seemed stunned, and looked at him again. What the hell is it with these two? Seems so strange. Northern sighed. Look, I'm not a fan of whatever you have planned in your head. Neither do I reckon getting in trouble when it could be avoided. But if we can have a sage among us, I'm sure it will go a long way. Plus, there would be a lady much more experienced and sane than you. Helena stared, dumbfounded. Raven, by the way, glanced at Helena and returned her gaze to Northern. Don't you feel like you might be overestimating her a little? I mean, she was practically my teacher. Hey, you bitch. Do you realize I'm here? But you are right. Having her on our side would be a great addition. Helena looked at both of them. Aren't you two missing a great detail here? The monster that you are talking about is a Maelstrom rank apex danger level. It's probably the highest you both have ever faced. You're right. While I faced a Maelstrom rank before, I don't think it was apex level. Still, you have hunted a Maelstrom before, and you'll have the chance to use your repertoire of abilities. Northern glared. My repertoire of abilities? Just how much do you know about me? Not much actually. I just figured that your day-to-day fights are just a display of your physical skills, even when you fought with the corpse eater in the mansion. While it was indeed a commendable fight, I don't think I saw what I expected of a drifter that survived a Tier V rift alone. Northern fumed. Mind I remind you that the rift was not Tier V until the last moment when Night Terror, who was the core of the rift, was evolving. All the same, a rift doesn't just evolve. You must have contributed greatly to Night Terror, the rift core, overcoming the rift guardian. When a guardian is killed by anything besides the drifters, that thing has to become the next guardian, which means an automatic update to another danger level. In Night Terror's case, I think such tremendous power caused the circumstances of the rift to shift and tier to increase. If you hadn't defeated the rift quickly, it would have become much harder to do. But at the same time, it does not nullify the fact that you achieved such a formidable feat and began living below my expectations. Northern felt like his head would burst, veins along his neck. You bitch! Who are you to expect anything of me? Call me a bitch one more time, and I will cut your throat. I doubt you can even as much touch me. Didn't you need my help walking in darkness? Your weakness amuses me. And like you're any better, you could be the best drifter in this desolation. And yet you are full of flaws and are a celestial coward despite the amazing potential you hold. No passion, no conviction, no discipline. At this rate, your entire life is headed for ruin. While they continued bickering at each other's necks with sharp words, glaring, Helena stared in stunned silence. She couldn't understand what was happening. Both of them were going at each other's throats with sharp words, glaring. It was amazing to see that someone could stand his ground when opposed with Raven's cockiness and arrogance. But it was even more amazing and delicious to watch Raven subtly getting worked up by someone. That girl had practically been an empty shell all this while. No one was even capable of getting her angry, sad, or happy. And now, even though she looked so pissed, Helena couldn't help but see some semblance of growth. Raven wasn't that girl she knew a couple of months ago. Although she still had a long way to go, maybe with this guy beside her, just maybe, Raven would have a compass of common sense to direct them on their journey. Or maybe not. Helena raised her head. That was when she saw a white-haired girl coming towards them. Her eyes grew wide. Huh? Isn't that? Raven turned her head. What are you doing, Terrence? You weren't supposed to come out yet. Helena shifted her wide eyes to Raven. Huh? Terrence, don't tell me. The Oracle, the one Afcon tried to have. Raven face-bombed herself and sighed. Yes, this is Terrence. I didn't want to bring her in yet because I knew how freaked out you would be about me bringing such a person out. But she insisted she would go with me. She too, after all, needs to get stronger. She paused, eyes digging deep into Helena's surprised stare. Then she added, Do you believe now that we can defeat the monster in the woods? Helena turned to her with a slight frown. No, I don't. Then she turned her eyes to the Oracle. But I want to give it a try. She looked at Northern. There's this guy who makes me very uncomfortable. She looked at Raven. There's you, a stubborn bitch. Then she looked at Terrence. And you are carrying an embodiment of holiness. This young girl is the closest to the voice of Ulwan can ever be. She paused and was silent for a couple of seconds. Then she smiled. Maybe, just maybe, we can really defeat the monster in the woods. If we do, I'll go with you to the Sleeping Mountains, and if we don't, if I see that we'll be losing anyone, I'll prioritize running away, and I will never see you again. Raven smiled and nodded. Then she looked to the front. What about you? Reno, from the distance, let out a shy laughter. Me? I can't possibly betray Afcon, and I'm not impressive on the battlefield. There's no way I can be of significant help to you. I'll just go back to Afcon and tell him I was not able to steal the map. Helena narrowed her eyes, lingered for a moment, and asked, Reno, why did Afcon want the map? He isn't even interested in going anywhere, for all I know. Reno was silent for a while. Then he said, I don't know either. Afcon just asked me to come get it. He had been monitoring you and knew when you took it from the ruins of Alcava. Also, he turned his eyes to Raven. I think you might have a traitor in your stronghold. With that, he turned. I sincerely hope you guys kill the monster in the woods and come back from the sleeping mountains. I too would have loved to be ambitious. Raven. He was silent. But you know, it isn't just that simple for us. Then he sighed. Never mind. The likes of you would never understand. He walked away. Chapter 233. A Strange and Odd Combination, Part 2. For individuals stood in a warm, cozy room, papers and materials scattered everywhere. Spectacles caught the eye at every glance, some in a meaningful manner, while others appeared to be mere junk. These 4 individuals stood around a table, which marked the center of the room. One lady wore a cloth that looked like animal hide, exposing most of her body, even her belly. Her arms rolled like muscled snakes as she leaned on the table, addressing the others. Another donned black leather armor, tightly fitted to accentuate her womanly figure, especially her waist. Her black tresses flowed with every slight movement of her head. Her gaze was intense and cold, carrying no hint of emotion. When one looked deep into her crimson eyes, their soul could get lost in the glamour they carried. That glamour, however, was more than a spark. They were flames of disaster, coldly burning beneath the depth of her eyes. Only when one got close enough could they catch a glimpse of it. The third was an elegant white lady wearing a smooth, beautiful body-tight white and gold armor. Her golden eyes focused and blinked as the conversation went on. Not much could be said about her. It was easy to miss that she was not a child but a vessel carrying tremendous burdens, yet she managed to smile heartily. In the corner of the table stood the odd one, the only man in the strange cohort, with white hair, pale skin, and blue eyes that burrowed furiously into the table between them. He was clad in black, lustrous armor that seemed to glint malevolently in the darkness of the night and the lambency of the twin moons. His face was devoid of any emotion, blank and observing with enviable focus as the feral-looking lady, who was a sage, continued. The monster is known as Kirathon, she said, looking at their faces. The most difficult thing about it is that I don't know if it has a real body. At the very least, all the times I tried hunting it, I've never encountered its real body and have always suffered severe damage. She then turned to Raven. Little worm, since you are so adamant on this, have you thought of a way to lure its real body out? Raven was silent for a while. Then she took her eyes on a short sail across everyone's face, returning back to Helena, and said, I believe the real body will be in the woods. One of the woods, I don't know much about Maelstrom, but it will be safe to believe that whatever this monster is, it has something like a talent ability. Northern moved his head slightly. Now that she mentioned it, he had known that fact from the beginning as regards monsters in general. Because it made no sense how he gained talent fragments from killing monsters. The soul was an inner shell, encompassing all essence of life. Talent was the core of that essence. When talent manifested, it solidified the core of the soul and gave it structure, forming a soul core. Of course, for a drifter they had to go into a rift after that for their soul core and talent to be further refined. But this was the basics of it all. Since monsters possessed a solid soul core, it was safe to say that the same process applied. However, the problem could be that theirs was unrefined, just like the walker before walking into a rift. They had talent and essence but couldn't use it. These monsters, too, had talents and essence but couldn't use them. What was not well known was whether, at a higher danger level regardless of ranks, that soul core and essence got refined, and perhaps their talent showcased itself. What was well known, however, was that Maelstrom rank monsters, at least the ones Northern had faced so far, all had talents and had awakened their abilities, meaning that they were with a more refined core and essence. Another issue, however, was the possibility of more than one talent because Maelstrom monsters had 4 soul cores. No one knew, not Northern nor anyone in the room. None of them, after all, had faced a Maelstrom rank monster except Northern and maybe Helena, who seemed to have launched a couple of attacks now and then on the subject matter. Still, a Maelstrom. I wonder how much talent fragments I'll receive. Northern licked his lips as Raven continued. I'm sure the monster is hiding its body in a single tree while projecting its consciousness, or using its talent ability on other trees. Helena thought for a while. Then she said, while I welcome that idea, it might not be as simple as that. But even if the monster has its body hidden in one of the trees, how do we locate that tree, because I'm sure you don't want us to go with axes and start hewing down trees. Raven gently took her eyes to Northern. Should it not be possible to figure out the difference of the trees with your ability? She's talking about soul eyes. Very irritating. Northern sighed with subtle disgust and responded. I don't know, maybe if I stare deeply. He paused and thought for a while. Actually, I should be able to detect where the monster's true body is. You guys will just have to buy me some time. Helena nodded. Fair enough. She paused, drowning the entire space in silence for a minute or two before continuing. I want you guys to understand that Afcon and I have hunted this creature over and over again, and I have very dreadful experiences with it. Especially when you're going with a team, we should all expect the worst of cunningness. I'm telling you, when push comes to shove, prioritize your own life, because that is exactly what I will do. She looked at them and added, the Kirathon has been here as long as we have, if not longer, so know that you'll be fighting against the Ancient of Days. She folded her arms and said evenly to them, so, which will it be? Would you like to rest? Or should we move now? Raven and Northern responded almost at the same time. Now. Helena stared at the both of them and scoffed. Sure feels good to be young. Chapter 234. Chaos, Part 1. The four of them stood at the edge of the forest, where the trees ended. Helena had a very irritated look on her face. She downturned her lips and spat away before looking back at the forest. Terence stared with tension drawn upon her face. Northern's expression was blank. He didn't particularly feel any kind of emotion. In fact, he was a little worried that he would be facing a maelstrom rank monster, and yet there was not an iota of fear in him. He didn't know what to think about it. He just felt empty, almost the same feeling after killing the corpse eater in his mansion. He looked at Raven and summoned a pair of blue hand gloves. These have effects against mental attacks, although I don't know how long they can hold on, and I plan to collect them back. Raven nodded and collected the gloves. Thank you. A minute later, the gloves sparkled to life, weaving themselves on her hands with white shards of light. Raven bore into the forest with an indifferent look on her face. I do feel somewhat protected. She glanced to her left. Thank you, Northern. Slam. Helena slammed her palms together and rubbed them. Enough, you guys said you wanted to do this now. I hope you don't end up regretting it. She looked at everyone. So, we locate the body of the monster, then make a plan. Are we not supposed to make a plan now for when we do that? Northern interrupted. I'm not a fan of plans. Do you have any? Northern lingered for a moment, then shook his head. Yeah. Didn't think so, Helena retorted. She added, just focus on finding the real body. The feral sage turned her eyes to Raven. Or do you have a plan? Although I don't plan to accept it because your plans are bound to be a train wreck. Raven nodded her head. I don't have a plan. Yet. Helena looked intensively at her for dozens of seconds, then turned to Terence. My lady. Terence chuckled softly. She then looked at Northern and smiled, and looked back at Helena. I think we will be fine. Helena bowed her head slightly. Hearing you say that brings so much peace to my heart. Northern raised a brow, watching the feral sage's sudden change of attitude and composure every time she addressed the oracle. While he did know that she was a priestess, he didn't know she held so much importance in a ruined land. After all, everyone is in the same miserable situation, and one could also say that they have been abandoned by Ul or the gods. But gods are something Northern knew did not really exist in this world. Maybe they did, but not in such a concept as he was used to. He sighed and looked ahead while Helena's voice pierced through the air. We move forward. Fearlessly, the cohort, now of 4, marched into the forest of Blackwood. For a while, they continued to walk in the forest, all of them protected one way or the other, treading in between the colossal dry woods. Helena, however, was making sure she wasn't looking up, but she too, so far, had been good, at least for the past 5 minutes. Perhaps you may not need us to buy you time. Northern raised a finger, gesturing for Raven to shut her mouth. He looked at Helena with slightly narrowed eyes. Have you ever entered this place and tried to hunt it with all the members of your cohort protected from its abilities one way or the other? Helena thought for a while, then looked at Northern. I don't think so. Why do you ask? Because it's natural for monsters to feel cornered when a group of people who are not subjective to its influence appears. And when it is cornered, its behavioral pattern will definitely change. Helena's eyes stayed on him for a while before she retorted, That's a plausible theory. How are you so sure? Well, I spent a lot of time with monsters, and I've been hunting with my dad from a very young age. She then nodded. I see. She then glanced around the trees. So, are you saying we shouldn't expect the usual? Northern nodded. Yes. He lingered for a moment and continued. But either way, I will find the real body. Northern paused and closed his eyes, only to open them the next second. He looked at them. What are you guys doing? They stood, watching him with curiosity heavily etched across their faces. What should we do? Helena asked. I don't know. Anything that won't distract me, Northern said abruptly and turned away from them. He closed his eyes for a while and silenced all distracting thoughts. There were a couple of ways he could go about this. He could decide to evolve Soul Eyes. While the talent ability might not be able to do much now, he was sure another level of it would be unlocked should he evolve it. But that would cost his precious talent fragments, and right now he was trying to reach Nomad rank as soon as he could. The second option was using the Unseeing Eyes. This optical ability, however, heavily burdened his mind. Northern also feared there was bound to be a rebound from using such a formidable ability. He was practically messing with the strings of reality's essence. Undoing someone's ability was a massive rule-breaking, and there was no way some punishment wouldn't come from breaking such a rule. Who knows if it was kicking in already, and maybe he just could bear it, but finding a Maelstrom rank monster through the weaves of reality was on a different scale, a much more powerful scale. And the mental burden was just too heavy for him to want to do it all over again. This thus left him to one last resort. Name: Chaos. Type: passive. Description: Chaos is the flow of all existential forces, tamed and untamed alike. You can perceive this chaotic flow. I should be able to sense it more vividly than before. Before now, Northern had been perceiving a little hint of it, and it had come to contribute to the growth of his perception and how effective Soul Eyes had been. But he wanted to take it to a whole different level. He wanted to sense this entire plane from the tip of his feet and fish out the difference. He was sure that the chaos flow of monsters would be different from that of trees, sands, the air drifters. Northern's focus delved deeper and deeper into a disturbing darkness. Bullets of sweat formed over his face as he couldn't help but go deeper. And then, in the nick of time, thousands of ligatures of flames emerged from the depth of darkness. It felt chaotic. Chapter 235. Chaos, Part 2. The essence of existence is woven so intricately that while every life has its own delicate order tying it to the essence of reality, there is also disorder. It's a simple, fair equilibrium between positive and negative, good and evil, sanity and insanity, order and chaos, life and death. This delicate balance is the fundamental makeup of every breath of life, such that as it is susceptible to exist, it is also to cease to exist. Chaos is what the other side of this balance is called. Chaos is negativity, chaos is malevolence, chaos is insanity, chaos is death. A conceptual understanding of this fact settled in Northern's mind the moment he began to follow each ligature. The 1,000 waves of ligatures were like paths to a much greater chaos, so perplexing, yet Northern couldn't initially discern why he had such a definite grasp over every single one of them. Following each one was like treading on a burning road. The heat, the fear, the danger of destruction assailed him from all sides. And yet there was a limit, something he figured could only be possible because he had the vestige of the Chaos Prince. Even so, It was already enough burden and detriment for him to bear. The ligatures were already perilous enough when he saw the chaos in every existence. The trees, as simple and harmless as they were, held an overwhelming convolution of destruction, and yet contained and peaceful. So peaceful that Northern couldn't help but ponder how powerful the other side of this chaos must be to maintain balance and peace with this level of insanity. And how was it that every living being, everything that had a breath of life, found its source in such destruction? The concept of chaos being an integral source of creation was something he couldn't quite comprehend. It was hard to accept, even though there was an inherent and perfect understanding of its violent nature in his mind, one that made him truly understand the overwhelming effect of using the active skill of chaos and how much damage it could bring not just to him but to the entire world. Looking at the chaos ligatures and sources made Northern realize that he was powerful but heavily limited by the concept of balance. Unless he planned to destroy the world, could he break free from such limitation? However, this understanding caused Northern to question something. What is it that the Chaos Prince wanted to achieve with such overwhelming power? What had he hoped to destroy and why? The murals depicted these strange beings, and it was clear they were not a history of Trael but of a different world. One that must be an integral part of the rift. Or had the Chaos Prince hoped to destroy the rift? Were there even rifts when the Chaos Prince existed? It would have been relatively easy for him to destroy rifts with such power. And this was only a fraction of what he wielded. Or maybe not, but it was his vestige. Meaning that it was only a trace of the true thing. Thinking about how powerful the Chaos Prince must have been made Northern break out in a cold sweat. No wonder such an existence could break the sun. Just imagine shattering an entire daystar. Northern shuddered. Let's just focus on finding the monster's body. It was a lot of work tracing each ligature. It was as though there were thousands of tangled threads, and one was trying to untangle them and find which one led to the eye of the needle. And it was taking quite some time, such that his cohort's curiosity was reaching its peak. "What do you think he's doing?" Helena whispered. "I don't know." She left a prolonged gaze on Raven and downturned her lips. "That's quite disappointing, considering that he is your buddy. I figured that you would know him more than anyone else." Raven frowned. "We are not buddies. All I know about him are theories that don't add up in my head. If they really are correct, then it makes no sense as to why such a person like him would even exist. Which is why I try not to overthink it." Helena's eyes went round. Oh, it's already at the stage where you are trying to stop yourself from overthinking. I hate how you're making that sound. Oh, you hate it? Okay then, I call dibs on him then. Raven scowled at her. Aren't you supposed to be older than us? What? Do I look like I'm 24? Raven sighed and averted her eyes. Suddenly, the entire forest shuddered, causing the rest of the three of them to look around in alertness. Raven extended her hands a little outward and summoned her swords. Helena's hands were slightly opened and ready to grip on anything any moment from now. Terence was surprisingly the calmest of them. Her golden eyes were glowing and were fixated on Northern. The entire forest became gloomy and began to rumble eerily. The weather of the night was the usual cold. This level of rumbling would have hinted at a very heavy thunderstorm, but the winds were calm and unmoving. If anything, they were too quiet. Terence moved her head slightly and looked away from Northern, gazing deep into the forest. Something is coming. People. A lot of people. She glanced at Northern. Whatever Mr. Northern is trying to do must be working. The sudden changes must mean the monster now senses a threat. The delicate oracle looked at Helena and asked, "Has there ever been a time before now where the monster fights first?" Helena lingered, then answered, "I don't know if it can be called a fight, but yes, every time a cohort comes here, they end up not doing what they come here to do. They even end up fighting against each other, arguments, hatred, discord, and eventually no one returns. It's always a hassle finding my way back. If that is the case, it is choosing a different means of attack this time. Then it's quite obvious that it had tried to use mental attacks on us, and that didn't work. Now it's sending people." Helena was silent for a while, looking at the priestess. Then she couldn't help but worriedly ask, "Sorry, which people?" Terence glanced up and returned her gaze to the depth of the woods, contorting a slight frown on her face. All the people it had taken so far. Chapter 236. The calm before the storm. Everybody it had taken away so far. The weight of those words echoed in Helena's heart, fueling her resolve. Her grip tightened on the crackling black rod as she braced herself for the coming battle. Beads of sweat formed on Helena's feral face, but she forced a grim smile. "Damn, this is going to be troublesome," she muttered under her breath. With a swift, fluid motion, Helena swung the rod in a series of arcing strikes, the edge cutting cleanly through the thick, stale air of the woods. The black sparks dancing along the length of the weapon seemed to hum with barely contained power. Helena shifted her weight, positioning the rod over her shoulder as she kept her keen brown eyes vigilantly scanning the trees. A couple of seconds later, they began to emerge, slow and steady. Humans just like them, armed with swords, spears, daggers, bows, some bare-knuckled. They all began to emerge from the woods like zombies. They paused around 10 meters away from the cohort, drenching the area in a momentary silence. Then, in a loud burst of motion, they rushed forward, swinging their weapons. Helena's heart pounded in her chest as the horde surged towards them, their weapons glinting in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. She took a deep breath and centered herself, the black rod in her hands thrumming with energy. The first attacker reached her, a burly man with a wicked-looking sword raised high. Helena sidestepped his clumsy swing with the grace of a dancer, bringing the rod around in a blinding arc. It connected with the man's ribs, and he crumpled to the ground with a strangled cry, wisps of black smoke trailing from the point of impact. Not pausing, Helena whirled to face the next opponent, a wiry woman wielding a rusty dagger. The woman's eyes were blank, devoid of any emotion or humanity. Helena grimaced as the woman charged towards her. A hint of recognition flickered on her face, then vanished. The dagger thrust towards her face, but Helena parried it aside with the rod, stepping into the woman's guard. She seemed to mutter something sadly, then with a sharp twist of her wrists, the rod crackled with dark energy that lashed out, slamming into the woman's chest. She ragdolled backward, hitting the ground hard. Helena gritted her teeth as she fended off another wave of mindless attackers. The woman she had struck down had indeed been familiar, one of the few drifters she had befriended while living within the stronghold. And she was from the third group sent to try to subjugate the forest and find the lost. Helena felt a pang of regret, but there was no time to dwell on it now. All around her, the rest of their cohort was engaged in their own desperate struggles. Raven danced through the fray, her twin blades flashing like liquid mercury. A sword thrust towards her midsection, but she batted it aside with almost casual ease, her counterattack a blur that left her assailant crumpling to the ground, clutching a ruined shoulder. Terence was formidable, although she couldn't match the sage and the master. She fought with brutal efficiency, each movement speaking of her hard work and tenacity. Her long silver sword swung here and there, biting into flesh and leaving deep lacerations. Yet for each one that fell, more surged to take their place. The oracle's lithe form danced amidst the chaos as she ducked and weaved past wild swings. Her sword was a thin sliver of razor-sharp steel that found gaps in armor with amazing accuracy. An arrow streaked towards her, but she dropped into a slide, the missile passing through where her head had been as she came up in a vicious cross-slash that dropped her archer. Barely registering the fallen man, she swung her head to the back. Northern, who was facing the other way, had his head tilted, her heart beating fast. At that moment she thought she had given Northern away to an attack by dodging it. But it seemed the strange boy also had his way around things. Even though Northern was occupied with whatever he was doing, he still had the eyes of a terror effect which allowed his armor to take reflex actions to protect him from harm. The horde, however, continued to surge, their numbers growing quickly, a seemingly bottomless well of thralls clawing and slashing their way forward. Helena blocked a wild overhead chop, muscles straining, before shoving her attacker back. As he stumbled, she followed through with a brutal thrust, the tip of the black rod slamming into his sternum with a sickening crunch. Black tendrils of energy lashed out, and he flew backward, body convulsing. She looked ahead and threw a quick glance at Northern. Damn it! Whatever he's doing must be really affecting the monster. She hissed and faced her own battle. Raven appeared at her side in a blur of motion, her eyes intense. Then she said, amidst the din of combat, "Please step back. Let me deal with all of them." Helena grunted as she deflected a flurry of knife strikes, pivoting to slam the butt of the rod into her assailant's jaw. "Aren't you getting too confident? Isn't this supposed to be a team effort? We need your strength for when Northern eventually locates the monster's true form. I know you haven't used your abilities and they must be reserved for a reason, right?" Helena frowned slightly. "Just mind your own business." No sooner were the words out of her mouth than a deafening roar shook the forest. A massive, lumbering shape burst through the tree-line, towering over even the largest of the thralls. It was vaguely humanoid but scaled and misshapen, muscles rippling beneath mottled gray skin. Rows of jagged fangs protruded from a jaw that could swallow a human whole, and beady black eyes burned with feral malevolence. "You have got to be kidding me," Raven growled, blades at the ready. The beast opened its cavernous maw, another ear-splitting roar ripping forth as spittle and rank breath washed over them. It took a thunderous step forward, each footfall shaking the ground. The thralls charging them parted like a wave, clearing a path towards the monster's Goliath form. It fixed its baleful glare upon Helena, Raven, and Terence, muscles tensing as if to pounce. Then its eyes slowly diverted to the human in black armor standing apart behind the cohort. Chapter 237. Sage Helena. Could that be its true form? Raven asked, a slight trepidation edging her tone. Crap, I don't know. If it is, then shouldn't your boyfriend be finished with whatever he's doing over there? Raven frowned slightly at Helena, but now was not the time. She fixed her gaze on the abomination before them. Terence stood behind them, a pensive glare on the malevolent creature that loomed before them. They still had the human minions to deal with, but this one posed a far greater threat than anything they had ever faced. Helena felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine, but she refused to allow fear to take root. Digging her boots into the soil, she held the black rod horizontally before her, the tip aimed squarely at the beast's chest. "Keep the rest away from me," she said lowly. "I'll handle this." Raven gave a curt nod, spinning away to engage the horde once more with a whirlwind of steel. Helena took a breath, steadying her hammering heartbeat as she poured all her focus into the creature before her. It seemed to sense her intent, yellowed fangs gnashing as it tensed to strike. Then, with an earth-shaking bellow, it charged, covering the distance between them in 3 enormous strides. Helena waited, the beast's thunderous footfalls rapidly closing. Then, at the final instant, she moved. With the agility Helena displayed against Raven's attacks, it was unmistakable that she was a creature of immense speed. But what she had unleashed so far didn't even come close to how swiftly she moved. Her figure flickered in the blink of an eye and streaked along a linear path. Helena's form flowed around the creature's attack with preternatural grace. Its clawed fist swept past her with enough force to shear through solid oak. But she wasn't there, she was stepping deftly aside, the black rod whirling in her hands. As the beast's lunge overextended, leaving its chest and vulnerable underbelly exposed, Helena struck. The rod was a streak of black sparks, slamming into the abomination's ribs with a sound like a thunderclap. A shockwave of force erupted outwards, shearing through trees in the rod's wake, as that barely contained power detonated like a bomb. The beast was launched backward, its earth-shattering roar choked off in a spray of foul ichor. It caromed off the ground hard enough to crater it, then again, smashing through the trunks of ancient oaks like they were blades of grass. Helena stood her ground, heaving breaths as the forest settled once more into eerie silence. The thralls and the cohort momentarily stunned into stillness. The beast stirred, hunks of its grotesque flesh sloughing off in ruin as it strained to rise. A feral grin split Helena's sweat-slicked face as she leveled the black rod once more. "That's all you've got?" she challenged, voice dripping with menace. "Come on, Let's go again. The beast responded with another bone-shaking bellow, its remaining eye blazing with incandescent fury. It surged back to its feet, towering over Helena with such immensity it nearly blotted out the twin moons. Then it charged again with enough force to shake the foundations of the world. The ground quaked as the beast dashed forward, each thunderous footfall like a small earthquake. Helena held her ground, black rod at the ready, as she watched its gargantuan form bear down on her with unstoppable momentum. At the last possible second, she moved. Throwing herself into a diving roll, Helena narrowly avoided being crushed under one of the monster's massive feet. As she came up in a crouch, she lashed out with the rod, its tip slamming into the beast's ankle with bone-jarring force. Black tendrils of sparks lashed outwards, gnawing at flesh and sinew. The creature stumbled, its earth-shaking roar now tinged with pain and fury. It whipped around with surprising agility for something its size, a fist larger than Helena's entire body scything through the air towards her with enough force to liquefy bone. But she was already moving, ducking under the wild haymaker with inches to spare. As the beast's arm sailed overhead, Helena struck again, the black rod a blur of motion as she rained a series of punishing blows against its forearm and shoulder. Each impact detonated like a grenade, shredding flesh and chipping away at the monster's staggering bulk. It reeled back with an ear-splitting bellow of rage and agony, ichor spraying from the ruin of its arm. The feral sage didn't let up, pressing the attack with a flurry of lightning-fast strikes, each landing with pinpoint accuracy on vital points. The knees, the elbows, the chest. Wherever the rod struck, ruin followed, scouring away chunks of the beast's mass in bursts of obliterating force. Through it all, the horde hung back, temporarily cowed into stillness as if realizing this was a battle beyond their capacity. Only Raven remained in constant motion, her blades weaving an impenetrable barrier that turned aside any thrall foolish enough to interfere. The beast fought back with the fury of the damned, shrugging off grievous wounds that would drop anything else in an instant. Claws raked towards Helena's face, only to be deflected at the last instant by the crackling black rod. It tried to bear her under with brute strength and unstoppable momentum, but she was always a step ahead, dodging and weaving around its ponderous attacks with the grace of a matador. And all the while, she struck, a drumbeat of devastation laying waste to the monster's form bit by agonizing bit. Gore-slick craters pocked its flesh, chunks of meat and shattered bone littering the shuddering earth around them. Yet still it kept coming, driven by a rage and pain that transcended the physical. With a bellow that shook Helena's very bones, it reared back, raising both ruined arms high in a final, desperate attack. Helena could feel the power building, sensing the barely contained forces writhing within the beast's burgeoning strike. This was it, an attack powerful enough to level the entire forest if it connected. She had one chance. As the beast's arms plunged downward with obliterating force, Helena moved. Not away, but forward, darting into the very heart of the descending death blow. The black rod became a flashing arc of annihilation, meeting the attack head-on in a resounding collision that set Helena's teeth rattling in her skull. A shockwave detonated outwards with the fury of a bomb, flattening the surrounding trees and kicking up a maelstrom of debris. Through the sudden storm of shredded bark and upended soil, Helena glimpsed the beast staggering, stunned by the recoil of its own overwhelming power being reflected back upon itself. Then she struck again, and again, a merciless barrage of blows from every angle as she poured every ounce of her being into an unstoppable offensive. The black rod became an extension of her will, shattering bone and pulping flesh with each thunderous impact that sent shockwaves rippling through the beast's mountainous bulk. Finally, with one last resounding strike that felt like it could shatter worlds, the beast crumpled, its knees shearing through the tortured earth as its mass crashed downwards in a plume of dust and ruin. It hit the ground with an impact that made the forest shudder, already beginning to dissolve into a sticky miasma of rapidly decomposing matter. Helena stood amidst the settling cloud, chest heaving. The black rod had been driven a foot into the ground by the sheer force of her final blow, scorched earth radiating outwards from the point of impact. Her muscles burned, tendons screaming in protest, but she drew herself upright through sheer willpower, refusing to show any outward signs of weakness or fatigue. For it was not over. The cohort still had the thralls to deal with. The fact that they could move was proof enough that this was not the true monster of the woods. But it was astonishing. Raven couldn't even take her eyes off the feral sage. She defeated it without using a single ability? Helena was carried throughout the battle by brute strength, speed, and the power of her weapon. She hadn't even used any of her talent abilities. Not a single one. Sage truly were a different level of power forces. Chapter 238. Not bad for a light warm-up. The thralls seemed to stir from their momentary stupor, emboldened now that the towering beast lay in rapidly disintegrating ruin. Their lifeless eyes regained focus, hands gripping weapons tighter as they sensed an opportunity. Raven watched them with narrowed eyes, her grip on her swords assured and practiced. She could feel Helena's weariness radiating off her like waves of heat. The feral sage had clearly expended enormous effort to bring down that abomination through sheer skill and raw power alone. A slight turn of Raven's head was enough to convey her intent. "Please rest for a moment," she said lowly. "Let me finish these ones." She glanced at Terence. "You too." Helena gave the barest hint of a nod, chest still heaving from exertion as she leaned heavily on the black rod, its tip gouging into the torn earth, while Terence lowered her sword and looked at Raven plainly. With a subtle shift of her stance, Raven allowed her focus to narrow to a razor's edge, all distractions falling away until there was only the impending dance. The twin swords in her hands stretched out like extensions of her body, perfectly balanced instruments of elegant lethality. The first thrall charged with a feral snarl, blade raised high in a clumsy overhead chop. Raven didn't so much as blink. In one seamless motion, she flowed into the attack like water crashing over rock. Her swords wove an intricate mesh of steel, deflecting the wild strike with almost contemptuous ease. As the thrall's guard opened from the momentum of its failed attack, Raven struck. Moving with the blurring speed and grace that made her one of the most accomplished duelists of her age, she whirled through the thrall's defenses. Her blades flashed in precise arcs, shearing through flesh and severing tendon in a whirlwind of strikes that lasted less than a heartbeat. The thrall crumpled to the ground, shorn of its limbs before it could even perceive the attacks that had disabled it. 3 more rushed her from the side, animalistic roars torn from ruined throats. Raven glided into their midst, swords trailing behind in a reflective silver blur that stained the darkness. When the afterimage faded, 2 thralls collapsed with shredded tendons and severed nerves rendering their bodies useless. The third managed half a rattling gasp before crumpling, Raven's blade having opened its throat in one impossibly precise strike. She didn't pause, couldn't afford to as more rushed inwards, a tide of aimless violence drawn by the scent of their own rancid vitality spilling across the forest floor. Raven moved in a mesmerizing dance, each step blending seamlessly into the next as her swords wove an impenetrable aegis of whirling steel. Her feet traced the forms of the Kageyama dual blades technique, the sublime art of duality in lethal harmony. Here, a sequence of flowing defenses met a flurry of strikes in a deafening clang of blades, not blocking or parrying but guiding the assault away while feeding momentum into a counterattack. And there, when the onslaught seemed fit to crush her under its sheer weight, she transitioned into spinning blade work that inflicted grievous wounds through the narrowest of openings, severing limbs and disabling attacks before they could land. All the while she moved in perfect balance and control, never allowing herself to be overwhelmed despite being surrounded by endless foes. At one point, a thrall leapt at her from behind, fangs gnashing and raking claws extended. Before it had even left the ground, Raven had whirled, blades tracing ephemeral arcs of silver light. The thrall landed in 2 neatly bisected pieces, flesh sizzling from the cauterized wounds. On the battle raged with Raven its unrelenting eye. Each foe that fell was promptly replaced by another, but through it all she fought with the cold poise of a sculptor carving masterpieces from yielding flesh. When the tide began to swell too thick to repel with blade work alone, Raven kicked it into overdrive. Planting her feet in the low duality stance, she inhaled deeply, focusing her will to a razor's edge. On the exhale, she erupted into action, body blurring into a whirling cyclone of flashing steel. The falling Sakura technique unleashed, each microscopic pause between strikes a freeze frame capturing Raven in a new, increasingly lethal stance. Here her sword swept low in searing cross-slashes that crippled, hobbling attackers with severed hamstrings and ankles. There she pirouetted with both blades extended in spiraling wheels of annihilation that dismembered and decapitated in equal measure. A heartbeat later her form sheathed itself in illusion, Raven's body vanishing in a blur of afterimages that wove between stunned attackers. The mirrored lotus illusion inflicted death from every angle, razor-edged petals of distortion rending flesh from bone in rapid sequence. By the time the last thrall fell, the dark woods had been transformed into a sprawling abattoir of severed limbs and rapidly cooling corpses. Raven stood in the epicenter, chest steadily heaving with each breath as she lowered her swords. Her clothes were speckled with rancid vitae, the front fall of her jet-black hair disheveled. Yet her eyes remained clear and focused, missing nothing as they scanned the treeline for any further threats. Only when she was satisfied that the last of the thralls had been neutralized did she relax her battle stance, rolling her shoulders in a subtle stretch as the tight coils of lethal potential unspooled once more. Turning to regard Helena with a raised eyebrow, Raven couldn't resist a tiny smirk. "Not bad for a light warm-up, eh?" Helena looked away and muttered, "Damn, I hate scions of those noble clans." Just like Helena, what Raven had showcased was pure strength with no use of talent abilities. However, the difference between her and Helena was that Raven was well trained by her clan. The deadly moves that Raven had used were undoubtedly battle arts, rooted and created from the deep history of the Kageyama clan. She had likely started practicing battle stances and footwork before learning how to walk. Helena, on the other hand, was just a commoner like many others. A girl with a relentless spirit and a bit of luck. She was quite envious of Raven, which was why she couldn't understand why someone as fortunate as her lived recklessly and did not value her life. Sigh. An audible heavy sigh resounded amidst them. Immediately, they all turned toward Northern's direction. The star of the night, the one everyone had been waiting for, finally turned. However, the moment he did, all three of their faces contorted with horror and became very pale. Northern frowned slightly. "What's wrong?" Terence shakily pointed at Northern. "Why your eyes?" Northern raised a confused brow, only for notifications to pop up before his eyes. "All eyes is resonating with chaos. The structure and composition of your eyes is changing. Chaos is reweaving its strings." Northern frowned at the notifications and looked at them. "What's wrong with my eyes?" Raven's voice rang out evenly. "You have two merged eyeballs on each eye. Terrifyingly beautiful. But you look like a monster, Northern." Northern blinked for a couple of seconds, utterly confused, but he sighed the next moment and moved his head slightly. "Like we have time for all that. Ready yourselves. Our true enemy is coming." Chapter 239, Chaos Constructor. "You say what now?" Helena leaned her head forward with a questioning expression. Northern shrugged. "Like I said, the real body will be emerging from the woods soon." After a couple more blinks, Northern's double eyeballs, polychoria, merged into one and became normal. They all stared at him in stunned silence. There was much to be surprised about, so it was hard to decide which aspect to tackle first. The silence ensued for a few more seconds. Then Helena's vigorous voice shattered it. "I'm sorry. What exactly did you do to the monster?" Northern looked aloof for a while, recalling the entire experience of disorganizing the chaos construct of all the trees here to make it so that the monster wouldn't be able to find any of them as suitable hosts. After, of course, finding the chaos construct of the monster itself first. It was simple yet not simple. Since he had an adept, beyond adept even, sensing of chaos in every being, Northern, with the attribute of chaos he possessed, could affect them. Of course, it was on a different and more manageable scale compared to using chaos as an active ability. That one was more impervious and destructive. All Northern had to do was, after tracing the ligatures of chaos and finding its connected source, which was the supposed existence itself, study the chaos construct. At first glance, Northern, after following over 300 ligatures, couldn't help but begin to notice the slight difference in each construct, from the ligatures themselves to the connected existence. It was easy to overlook. In fact, Northern's opinion was that it was not something meant to be seen. However, there was a strong possibility that all eyes could have played a huge role in why he was able to discern such slight and unnoticeable details. After all, while handling the ligatures, he felt like himself. Just that he existed in a special plane, one submerged in the inner workings of reality. Which meant that his eyes, which were one of the core parts of his physical body, could still be felt and used as much as he could feel and use his hand. All eyes could have naturally done its function. If this hypothesis of his was correct, it would mean Northern had just gained something that the Chaos Prince never had. However, he didn't have the time to ponder and think about that fact. After recognizing the unnoticeable difference with each chaos construct, Northern began to take a more deliberate study toward them as he traced their connected existence. When he got to over 500 ligatures, Northern didn't need to trace them to the connected source before knowing which existence it was. The trees, the soil, and the wind, these were the major ligatures. There were insignificant ones that led to some matter like stones and pebbles, fungi, moss, and lichen. And with time, even those became very recognizable as they were not numerous. Eventually, Northern had perfectly understood the construct of chaos in this forest, so when he saw that of the monster, he recognized it immediately. It was a bit tricky. At first, even after tracing over 2,000 ligatures, he could not find the one. Afraid that he must have missed it, Northern began a delicate search all over again. However, this time was quicker because he was more familiar with the constructs. It was because of that familiarity that he was able to find the peculiarity hidden in a certain ligature. Like any other, it was just like a line of flame, flowing through the darkness that shrouded this subreality. But with a deeper and intensive look, Northern could see it. He could see the difference. Within the ligature was another one, a much fiercer but somehow contained flow. It was like two ligatures were embedded in one, which was not quite the case so far that Northern had been inspecting. Something had to be wrong. Then it clicked. It made a lot of sense. If the monster was inhabiting trees, then did this mean that its chaos construct was also following that pattern and inhabiting the chaos construct of the tree the monster itself was using as a host? If that was the case, then would it be possible to remove one construct from the other? What started as curiosity, however, led Northern to try his luck. He wasn't even sure if it would work, and even if it did, he was sure it would be a painful experience. First, he tried to immerse his hand into the ligatures, touching the chaos construct, and it was indeed a painful and bitter experience. With immediate effect, his hands began to deconstruct from the inside out, along with searing pain, as if they were being burned from within by lava from the depth of a volcano. Luckily, the rate at which they were being deconstructed was how Chaos Thread was reconstructing them back. That, at the very least, kept him from losing his hands before getting to do anything meaningful with the constructs. But at the same time, it caused him 100 times more pain, because the longer his hands stayed in the chaos construct, the quicker his hands deconstructed, and hence causing Chaos Thread to respond with equal speed of regeneration. Northern had to endure the burning pain of his hands being torn apart, forcefully mended together, and being torn apart again, over and over again, while keeping his focus to ensure he wasn't messing up with what he was doing. It should never have been possible to touch a chaos construct. But the unseeing eyes and Chaos Thread made it possible, although Northern could not say for sure. But he suspected that even the Chaos Prince had never tried this. Eventually, after a long while of delicately removing the embedded ligature, Northern twisted its construct. He wasn't sure, but it was just an idea that if he could mess up the construct such that the ligature wouldn't be able to fit into another ligature, the monster would just end up hopping into another tree. Messing up the chaos construct was less difficult than separating the ligatures. It was more like he was unlinking tiny fibers of flames and linking them differently than they were. When he was done, he could tell that no matter how hard the ligature tried, it couldn't fit into another one. Simply because the chaos construct of the ligature permitted it to enter into another ligature, that was its essence. But messing up with the construct meant destroying that particular essence. Now, the ligature's chaos construct could not fit into other ligatures. Maybe it would eventually find a match. It could be lucky enough to find a construct that fits the new sequence Northern had linked. But that was certainly not happening soon. This disruption was what caused the monster to revert to its original body. And finally, Northern opened his eyes back to the real world. Luckily, with no physical damage whatsoever. But his mind had taken an even heavier toll than he had expected. This, however, had its advantages and disadvantages. Chapter 240, Damnation for a Being. Northern was silent for a few minutes after Helena's question. He sighed and shook his head slightly, then said, "Even if I explained, you wouldn't comprehend." Helena nodded cockily. "Try me. I'd love to, but you see, we don't really have the forest shuddered heavily, interrupting his speech. Northern looked around the trembling trees and sighed once more, then completed, "Time." He bent his head right then left, cracking the bones in his neck, then folded and unfolded his hands to see if they were in good condition. Chaos Thread truly was an amazing attribute. Aside from the fact that it caused tremendous pain when doing its work of mending, it made Northern's hands feel like they hadn't gone through all that agony. Imagining what he would have been like without the attribute, he didn't even want to consider it. Northern looked down for a moment, then looked up at the rest of them with slightly narrowed eyes. He seemed skeptical as he spoke, hesitating slightly. "Would it be possible to let me handle this one alone?" The three of them turned their eyes toward him. Helena was the first to exclaim, "Oh, save Matinis, I thought you at least had a bit of common sense. To think I was wrong the whole time." She looked at Raven. "What rank did you say this guy was again?" "Drifter," Raven answered shortly. Even she seemed taken aback by Northern's bold suggestion. "Right, a drifter. And you think you can take on a maelstrom rank monster alone?" Northern smiled slightly and said to her, "I wouldn't be alone, Miss Sage." Helena tilted her head back, narrowing her eyes. "What?" Northern's small smile grew a little wider, appearing incredibly smug. "You see, I have companions, just like me." At that instant, two more Northerns appeared, both on his right and on his left. All clad in black, lustrous armor, too ominous to be referred to as anything less than monstrous. Helena found her mouth open, hoping to speak, but words failed her. Raven raised her chin slightly. As usual, her expression was impassive. And Terence? Her eyes gleamed, brimming with admiration and awe. A cloning ability was indeed already rare. But being able to perfectly copy his armor was even rarer. Northern looked at the other two, inspecting the Night Terror armor they had on. While he had been pondering it for a while now, he wasn't entirely sure. But somehow, his eyes and senses could now discern better the extent to which his soul was cloned. The armor, while its functionality was also copied, its orderability wasn't. Also, Northern discovered that right now, his clones were incapable of using his talents. Except the own talents. Meaning the only thing they could do was clone themselves. And that made a lot of sense, considering it became an own talent after he ranked up. Maybe they would be able to use his other talents when those ones become own talents too. Or maybe there was a limit to which talents they could use, and maybe that limit was tied to the fact that he had not evolved the attribute rank. Another possibility was, it could be that cloning is all they can do because of the attribute. After all, they were unable to use any of his attributes. None at all. Not even formless. "There are three of you." Finally, words broke out of Helena's mouth. Northern raised his head slightly, savoring the moment to its fullest. "Two, actually." The shuddering of the forest once again resounded. And simultaneously, a black flame enveloped the Northern in the middle. The other two had a deadpan expression, mirroring how Northern would have been if he hadn't learned to smile. Helena wore a very wary expression as she watched the black fire burn Northern. Of course, she wasn't foolish enough to start freaking out. All three of them had an essential understanding that this young man had something unfathomably shocking up his sleeves. And watching it unfold was beyond exciting. It was a mesmerizing spectacle that held them all spellbound. Finally, the flames licked off Northern's skin, revealing a completely different being before them. His eyes were black and vicious, empty and dreadful. His black hair was fiery and like the mane of a colossal beast. Red runes, like tattoos, ran across his charcoal skin, his body barely covered by an encroaching and gloomy darkness. Primal evil radiated from the air around him. He was different. He was a demon. He was... Call. Northern raised a corner of his lips. It did not look good at all. His razor teeth displayed a vicious and fearsome grin. One that made even Helena shrink from cold fear. Whatever that was, couldn't be a drifter. No, it made no sense for that to be the power of a drifter. The presence, the power she could feel from him, nullified all common sense. This was a monster, a maelstrom-rank monster. The shuddering in the forest once again resounded. Whatever was coming for them was definitely taking its time. The steps sounded large and heavy. It was probably big enough to cover tens of meters in a single move. Because every resounding shudder shook the entire landscape more heavily than the last. Northern, in Call's nasty and evil visage, then said, "So, what do you say?" His voice was still hoarse as usual. Helena, trapped in stunned silence, turned to Raven, who, in response, shrugged. Helena shifted her eyes back to Northern. "Well, I guess the battlefield is yours." Her voice shook slightly, her body tinged with excitement. She didn't know that a day would come when she'd be looking forward to a fight with these abominations. A battle that could end one's life. She didn't know that she'd be filled with exhilaration in anticipation of how it would unfold. Watching Northern, shrouded not just in Call's appearance but embodying his soul and powers, walk forward, her heart raced. Not just hers. Raven was more adept at hiding her feelings, but her eyes did not waver from the moving damnation of a being as he passed. Her crimson eyes trailed along. In their depth was a subtle spark of excitement. She too, like Helena, was looking forward to it. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.